Hello and welcome to Reach and Reflect, a podcast where we interview guests from both traditional and alternative life paths with the aim of figuring out, for the benefit of our audience, where they find fulfillment and meaning. Joe is the son of an activist and a teacher who evolved early on from a middle-of-the-pack beach bum teen into a true go-getter. He carved out a niche in a competitive educational space and used that as his secret sauce to garner admission into Harvard. However, Joe's college experience was overshadowed by a painful health condition, the conflicting diagnoses of which shattered his worldview and ultimately led him to found Karuna, his health tech startup. At just 24 years old, Joe exhibits extraordinary levels of insight, empathy, and social responsibility. He found appearing on the podcast very integrative and therapeutic. We hope those feelings are felt by you, the audience. As always, we ask our audience to check in with how well this guest resonates with you. Resonance may be a sign that your path or purpose is along the same lines as our guests. Thank you. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a rating or review. We're going to dive deep into your life story. We're going to highlight not just the highlights, but also kind of whatever lowlights you feel comfortable talking about and trying to dive into there and really pull out like the strategies that you were able to use to move out of them in order to help viewers or our audience who might be in similar situations move through their struggles. As always, we invite our viewers to check in with themselves and see whether or not they resonate with our guest today. Resonance might be a sign that your life path or purpose is similar to our guests. And with that, our guest today is Joe Kahn. If you could just give us a quick bio, like how old are you, what are you doing, where are you from?
Can do. I am 24, coming up on 25 in a couple months. Was born and raised in South Africa. Stayed there until I was 18. Came out to the States for my undergrad, initially thinking that I would focus on international development and economics, and then moving over into computer science and health policy. And came out to San Francisco when I was a senior in college to work on a startup and explore life after college, I guess, to try to dip my toe in, and have now been in the city for about 2 years.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll dive deep into all that stuff in just a minute, but that's so I've had a lot of immigrants on, surprisingly.
Okay.
But this is fantastic. This is the melting pot of North America and San Francisco at our fingertips. So before we dive in, I just want to explain like the methodology we like to use to get things to resonate more with our guests. And as we go through these questions, if you could just do your best to like really paint a picture of the situations you might have been in, like, what did things look like around you? How did you feel? We're going to get fluffy with it.
Okay. Fluffy's good.
Because I find stories resonate more with people than facts.
Yeah.
No one remembers what happened in 1854, but people do. I see you crying.
I'm thinking about it.
But people tend to remember like scenes and feelings, and life is scenic and story-like in nature. So let's get into that.
Yeah.
Cool. So first, could you tell me about your current position in life? So where are you now? What are you doing professionally? And what's it like being Joe?
What's it like being Joe? I am running a early stage healthcare startup. We focus on solving the problem of bidirectional patient access. So when someone is feeling alone or fearful or helpless, how do you make it as easy as possible for them to get in touch with the right people inside the healthcare system? And then the flip side is, if you're a healthcare worker and you have a way to change the trajectory of someone's health, how do we help you get in touch with that patient when they're most impactable, when it is most likely to resonate with them? Those are the problems that we focus on. Team is about 10 at the moment, split across business, product, engineering, design, and just a extraordinarily mission-driven and kind group of humans. So that probably accounts for the vast majority of my mental space. Spend a lot of time outdoors in nature. I try to lose myself in music as well. Those are two deep sources of meaning for me today. I think I'm on a track of doing 2 live music events a week at the moment. So it's kind of work, eat, maybe sometimes a little bit, sleep, listen to music, and ideally do all of that on a mountain every now and then. It's kind of the recipe for what it is like to be Joe.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And just in case I didn't get it right in the beginning, what positions do you hold at the startup, and can you tell us what it's called?
Yeah, totally. I'm the founder and CEO of the company. Started it with a really good friend of mine, Yasif Muhammad Ali, when we were in college in Cambridge. He was at MIT finishing up his master's program, and I was wrapping up my undergrad in computer science.
At
Harvard, sorry.
Sure.
Yeah. And the position I hold right now is functionally really focused on sales, customer development, some amount of product, but really, really most focused on spending a lot of time with progressive healthcare organizations and insurance companies trying to understand both how to build something that makes a tremendous impact on a 3 to 5 year horizon, and also how to carve out the right starting points.
It's tricky.
It's definitely a tricky balance. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for the background and summary of where you're at today.
Sure.
That's amazing. I actually didn't realize how relatively young you were.
Yeah. Relatively young, for sure.
That's super cool, man. Very excited to get deeper into this. So what we're going to do now is rewind a bit.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about basically your origin story.
Sounds like the start of a meditation.
It kind of is, but 2 hours.
Okay.
So how about let's start with your childhood,
Sure.
Your younger years, and can you tell me what your family was like?
Yeah, I had a very interesting childhood. My parents are both extremely dynamic and very principled. My dad has spent most of his life chasing work that he finds more and more impactful, and has routinely turned away from pretty amazing opportunities to focus on impact.
What sort of impact?
Probably most notable would be his work as a anti-apartheid activist during the 70s and 80s, where he actively opposed the apartheid government in South Africa and was exiled from the country, lived across the border in Botswana. And he got there by turning away from a PhD that he jointly received at Cambridge and Imperial College in the UK, when he realized that the work he was doing was mostly funded by the military and the application areas were mostly around weapons of mass destruction and the like. So
fun stuff.
Super fun stuff. That was a major course correction for him. And then later in life, he's focused on helping developing economies figure out how to increase the throughput of their research and development pipelines through to patents and economic productivity. So how does the government think about where to focus its grant funding to maximize prosperity for its people? And my mom has had impact in 2 very different levels, I think. One is that she's just an extraordinary teacher and really, really, really connects with children in a pretty incredible way. So for most of my life, she has been teaching kids with special needs or special situations, everything from kids who are struggling with bipolar disorder or ADHD or autism, through to kids who are world champion horse riders or athletes or pianists and can't fit into a standard schooling schedule. So she's really defined a lot of her work by walking with children and helping them realize their fullest potential and find fulfillment. And then before that, she was very involved in empowering Black educators in South Africa. She started a newspaper called The Teacher's Voice, which I was kind of a part of. I think I was carried around to the meetings on her back as a 1 or 2 year old. And she also did some work on deracializing the education system in South Africa post-apartheid. There were basically about a dozen different educational systems for different tribes. And then all of a sudden, with integration, we had to figure out how to take what effectively were many, many countries within a country and bring them all together. So she did work on that. Long-winded way of saying that my parents are both very focused on impact, both at the level of individuals and then at a societal level. So that colored every part of my childhood, I think initially mostly subconsciously when I was little. And then as I got older and realized the importance of what my parents had done in the context of South Africa and Africa, it became very inspiring for me intellectually. Whereas as a kid, I was kind of like, oh, my parents aren't that cool. They're just parents.
And how do you feel about them now? Do you think they're cool now?
Do I think they're cool? I think they're people. I'm very proud of both my parents. I think they've both been through a lot. They've always fought their hardest for what they believe in. Yeah. So,
and to me, that sounds pretty damn cool.
I think it's pretty cool. Yeah. Overall, pretty damn cool.
Awesome. And can you trace any of your interests back to your parents?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Little ones and big ones. I've said to my mom at points that she is the music in my life. We have struggled at times, as happens with, I think, every parent and child, to find connection with each other as our interests have evolved. And in talking about where we connect, I think one of the most profound ways is in music, where from the time that I was really, really little, she was just wrapping my entire experience of life in classical music, especially. So that's an interest that continues to shape my experience and is very important to me, and so clearly comes from her. I think with my dad, one easy example would be the social justice and social impact perspective on life. He would say things like, your life will only be meaningful insofar as it meaningfully impacts the lives of other people. That's the kind of thing he would say. Or he would talk about fighting battles where if you were to lose them, you would still know you were fighting the good fight. So that's definitely shaped how I see the world in big and little ways.
And he was telling you to this at what age? I'm picturing 2-year-old Joe on mom's back.
Right. There might have been some subliminal messaging at that point. This was probably really getting going when I was hitting middle school. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's a great segue. Let's talk about middle school.
Okay. Let's not talk about middle school. No, I'm kidding. It's just it's such a crazy, wild period in so many people's lives.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of our audience is going to be potentially, just coming out of that age, or even now kids using the internet at such a young age now. And I know it's a really tumultuous time. It was for me.
Right.
Literally everyone else I had on too, same thing. And so if we could dive into that, like
what
made it so crazy for you, and then how you dealt with it.
Wow. I mean, there were so many different pieces. So my parents got divorced when I was probably 5 or so, and their relationship had really begun to deteriorate when I was much younger than that. And as a result, I didn't really think that I had a clear model of what a family unit would look like, and there were these societal ideas of what love is like or what marriage is like that were in pretty sharp juxtaposition to what I saw around me. And a big part of middle school was having my own little sexual awakening, I guess, where you're like, wow, I am a being that is interested in other beings. So there was some early anxiety there around what it would mean to find love, to be in love, to be loved, that was perhaps especially present for me, and I'm sure for basically any kid whose parents split up, or a child who loses a parent or something like that. So that was in the backdrop. And at the same time, I had this sort of academic awakening almost. I was at this really privileged school from the time I was 5 years old until I graduated from high school. And it was expensive, and my family was sort of upper-ish middle class, but not exactly loaded. And we couldn't really afford for me to continue going there. I mean, we could, but with very meaningful sacrifice. And so I got to 6th grade, and my dad basically said, look, like, we're gonna look at other schools. This isn't gonna work for you. And my mom was like, no, we're not. And it was basically the case that the only way I was gonna stay there is if I got some kind of scholarship. And so basically overnight, my mom in particular pulled out all the stops on academia and self-learning and teaching, and took me from a relatively smart kid who did okay in his, middle school classes with 25 students each, placing 5th or 6th in the class, to winning the scholarship to go to the high school. In South Africa, we called high school college. So to go to the college. And that was one of those moments, I think, where I realized, or my mother encouraged me to realize, probably more the second than the first. I think parents have an incredible influence, that if I was given space, if opportunity was put in front of me, I could expand to fill that opportunity. So there was this new emerging self-efficacy, and with that also a lot of pressure. Because as you realize what you can be at the same time as understanding what you are, that gap can be torturous. Or it can be an extraordinary celebration. It can be many different things. But for me, I think it was a little torturous. And that's still something I struggle with today, but also drives me today. So at least 2 themes. One was, what is this love thing, and will I ever find it? And another theme was, wow, I can kind of do it, whatever it is, if I have the space and the support and I can see the opportunity. And then encountering the dark side of that, which is just an incredible amount of pressure. So I went from being a kid who was just chilling on the beach in South Africa and surfing, playing a lot of video games, watching a ton of TV, running around outside, to a kid who was like, okay, well, what's the next thing that I can do? Like, what else is out there?
It's quite the transformation.
Yeah, and depending on which story you tell yourself, it might have been a transformation that started when I was in the womb. It might be a transformation that I just kind of happened onto myself as a precocious 12-year-old. And it's probably all of these things, right? But all of these moments, these inflection points, you can kind of tell the story of, oh, here's how I got lucky, or here's how I worked really hard, or here are the accidents, like the mistakes I made that kind of steered me towards something different and new. And if this were the college admissions podcast, I'd be telling one story, but this is the authenticity podcast. So I'm doing my best to tell that story.
Yeah. Well, the part of the authenticity, at least for me, is like finding out, okay, what were those crazy turns and inflection points?
Yeah.
And it sounds like college admissions is a part of that. So if you can.
Had we spoken about that before? Or did you just pick up on that right now?
Just right now.
Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, college admissions was definitely another part of that. So firstly, if I take a step back, the story that resonates with me most profoundly about my life so far is that people take an interest in me in ways that don't really make sense or aren't super rational. And they'll kind of pick me up and put me on their shoulders and run with me to the next thing, and then hand me off to someone else. And I can point to people in my childhood, I can point to friends, I can point to teachers. But the most cohesive narrative of self is one where I kind of get lucky and I meet these amazing people, and they look at me and they're like, yeah, I guess I'll help you out. And embedded in that is a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of putting yourself in the right places. But it definitely feels like the arc of my life has been people taking bets on me that I didn't necessarily, well, this is a silly thing to say in some sense, but like didn't necessarily deserve, and then working my butt off to make sure that the bet landed in the right direction. Okay.
What makes you say the first part of not deserving it?
Because this stuff is so wound up in privilege and identity, right? I think I walk into a lot of rooms and there are people in the room who'll say, that's kind of what I was like when I was 25. Like, yeah, I see myself in that kid. Or, yeah, if I could go back and help myself when I was that age, like I would do that. And Joe seems like that guy. So there's this sense in which like every bet people make is driven by like bias and their own experiences. And I'm in rooms a lot with people who look like me and can relate to me, at least on the surface. I mean, I think my life in general is very different. I'm like a South African with activist parents. I carried the South African Constitution around in my breast pocket as an 8-year-old. It's like, yeah.
Sorry. This is not the high fashion podcast.
This is not the high. I'm sorry. I'll see myself out. So, below the surface, like I don't look like those people at all. But you drop me off in New York or something, and I look a lot like a lot of people there who have ridden the waves of privilege and hard work and family legacy and all of those things. So when I say I don't know if I've deserved for people to take bets on me, that's kind of where that self-consciousness comes from.
I noticed you're focusing a lot on like looks like.
Yeah. As opposed to
what I mean, like the content of ideas or perceived intelligence.
Yeah.
Or you're saying a lot of hard working, so conscientiousness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's when I interact with you and when I first met you, that's what came through to me.
Mm-hmm.
Was this guy is smart, he's authentic, you seem very caring, very open-hearted, I would say.
Yeah.
As well as super conscientious, as evidenced by your history, right? And so for me, that's what stood out. I wasn't like, this guy looks white. Talk to him, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm just wondering, like, was that the vibe you were getting from people? Do you think they were seeing that more so than the other qualities?
No, I don't really think I ever got that vibe. I think it's me. I think I'm trying to account for the reality that even if you have amazing ideas or a massive soul or heart, if you don't get through the door in the first place, like those ideas end up not mattering as much for a lot of people. And so I don't want to diminish like the work that I've done or the conversations that I'm able to have or the way that I'm able to connect with people, especially around things that I'm passionate about. But the fact that I even have the opportunity to do that, the fact that people are patient with me, or the fact that people will say, oh yeah, it's okay for you to have these crazy big ideas, youngin'. That's, I think, the core of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a huge blessing. And when I think of the word deserve, I think someone made a value judgment essentially and said, you deserve this, right? And
right.
And so I guess for me, it's like, does appearance, like to what extent does appearance factor into that, right? Because I heard a lot of looks like, and it's like, yeah, if you show, even if you were, say, a white guy with like dreadlocks, he walk in like, boy, it's gonna be hard for me to take you seriously because I could smell your hair from 3 miles away.
Right.
Like,
right.
It's less so like the at least for me, the skin color thing, and more so like the how do you present yourself type thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people will see, like, as we go through like the episodes of the podcast, like it's super like multinational.
Yeah.
Like that's at least, I don't know, it just is a foreign thing to me. I'm sure it exists in pockets where people are like, oh, he's not got the right skin color, well, fuck him. But
well, I think it's more subconscious than that, right? For most people, it's just like how open you are to someone when you first meet them, right? Like every interaction you have is taking a chance on someone. Like you're giving them your attention, your time. Like you're trying to recreate their experiences in your own. And even the smallest changes in perception, I think, can mean that you're less receptive to receiving that whole person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly a possibility. I think it's impossible to know also.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a guess that you have to make because I can never see the value judgments you're making and anyone else is making. And I feel like a lot of assumption in that, and like how widespread is that we can't possibly know.
Yeah.
I think, at least me personally, I have a tendency to gravitate towards people I think I will relate with more.
Yeah.
Because it's more comfortable for me. Because, like you said, we're always recreating those experiences, and like, if we can do that, then we have some common ground to interact on, right? But for me, I found, number one, I don't look like many of my friends because I'm mixed, right? And so it's always been around other interests.
Yeah.
Right. And those to me are always way stronger than how we look or anything. And it's gotten to the point where like looks to me don't really matter unless, again, I could smell you from the other room and I'm like, dude, wash yourself. Right. But
this sounds like something that has really resonated with you. It's like the Burning Man residue.
Yeah. Like, dude, you've been dusty for way too long.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I just think it's interesting because I know it's like culturally there's been so much focus on color recently, at least in the normal media narrative. But like in my personal life, I haven't seen that. I didn't see it in college. I felt it had been in high school, but it was mostly more perceived than reality for me. Is what I realized after looking back. Because I was telling myself a story like, I'm too Asian for the white kids, or I'm too white for the Asian kids, and like. But I realized like actually no, like it was more just we didn't resonate on other levels. And I think it can get easy to get stuck in that worldview because it's so surface level there. Yeah. Right. But life is not surface level at all to me.
It's not, but it is a pretty good indicator of some of the experiences you might have had. I can't tell you how many times I've been dropped into some kind of healthcare networking event in New York and am immediately asked whether or not I spent my summers in the Hamptons, or where in the Hamptons I holidayed, or whether or not I was part of some sailing team, because you're all of these things are signaling all the time to everyone around us. Yeah. And so there's, even if you don't actually get to that level of connection, there could be this underlying assumption that we've got a whole bunch of stuff in common. And that's kind of a scary thing. I mean, it definitely contributes to imposter syndrome for me sometimes. I'm sure it does for others. And it can probably mean that the foundation of a relationship feels shaky. At least it feels shaky to the person with less of those experiences in the room, because there's this assumption that everything is okay and you guys get each other. But there's all of this hidden trauma, individual trauma, like cultural trauma that is there. I mean, it's like when you're really not okay, when you're not feeling okay, and someone says to you, hey, you're doing so well, I'm so proud of you, or it's incredible what you're achieving at the moment. That can be really hard because you're fundamentally not feeling seen. And there's this tension between how you want to be seen and the way that people are seeing you, and then what's really going under the surface. And bearing that tension, like, it has to snap eventually.
Yeah. I hear you loud and clear on that. There's a few things. I'm really glad you zeroed on the word assumption twice, because that's what I was seeing it as. I'm like, I don't see the problem here necessarily as the initial, like, I see the problem here as the assumptions being made. Okay. Based off of what I think is a really, really, really unsophisticated metric of viewing somebody, which is what color is your skin, right? That's like as boring to me as it gets for judging someone and what they might have done. But people do it, and they make the assumption that because you're of this color, you have gone vacationing in the Hamptons, right? And then suddenly you're off on a totally wrong foot because maybe that's not the case. Maybe it is, maybe it's a shortcut to getting to know someone. But to me, like, I just see that as like, if you can recognize it, a kind of shitty way of looking at the world relative to other ones, which is like, be open and like, let's just hear you tell me your story, right? Yeah. Rather than me assuming I know your story, because that sucks in any situation. Like assuming like, oh, you're dumb or smart or whatever. Just assumptions tend not to work. But then that also targets on your lived reality and the way you perceive it versus the way other people perceive it. And that tension, right? That's also really, first of all, crazy insightful for you to point out. At least I think so. So thank you. And I think a lot of that's going to resonate with a lot of reviewers too, because it does suck when you're feeling one way and people see it a totally different way. But what I would also challenge that with, if I may, is how often do you find that what they perceived could also be correct? In addition to, I know we talked about earlier, replacing the words no, but with yes and, right? Do you find yourself in those looking back? Like, how do you reconcile that? And then what happens afterward?
So the case being that someone does make a snap judgment about you, and it turns out that it carries some meaningful weight,
or yeah,
but is not the whole picture.
Yeah, it's abstractly, yes. Or like how they're saying, you're doing so well, I'm proud. And it's like, maybe they're proud of a thing that you actually did, right?
Yeah.
And then, but you did do the thing.
Right.
And are they not allowed to be proud of that thing?
I think it's wonderful for them to be proud of that thing.
Yeah.
But there's this, I said, but it's wonderful for them to be proud of that thing and to truly be seen, to be, in some sense, I think that truly being seen means someone identifying that in you and saying, wow, you're doing a great job. And internally being able to say, I am doing a great job. And I'm really struggling with this other stuff. So a different angle on this is that the experience of being seen is partly about whether or not someone is actually seeing you, but it's partly about whether or not you can acknowledge that what they're seeing in you is part of you as well.
It's a two-way street.
It's definitely a two-way street. Yeah. I like that idea.
That one's from my mom.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
So props to her.
It's all about the moms.
Yeah. Well, and the dads. Right now, mom scored a point. Yeah, one other concept I want to bring up, because I have this conversation with my girlfriend Chelsea a lot, because both she and I have this habit, or she's got a really big habit of regretting things, and sometimes it'll happen so often I'm like, stop being regretty Betty.
Okay.
Right? Like, and I'll just call her Betty just to snap her out of it, because she's like, okay, yeah, I regret that, and there's other things going on here, and you realize there's like that perspective of regret. And there's one of being proud, and there's one of being happy. And then I say at the top, there's this other perspective called all-seeing Angelica. Angelica sees all of them, right? And she realizes all of these are valid in their own way. And it, even though maybe in the moment you're really feeling the regret, it's important not to invalidate the other ones.
And so do you try to snap her into all-seeing Angelica from time to time?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Why not all-seeing Angie? It feels like that's more.
Betty and Angie. Sure, Angie can be your nickname.
Cool. All right, Angie's the nickname.
Yeah, it just came up. It was in the moment naming.
One I really love is stop shitting all over yourself. Which I've gotten from, I'm lucky to have a coach in the work that I'm doing at Karuna, but I have done my fair share of therapy as well, and that's one of the ideas that I really love. Yeah. So much of emotional pain comes from, I shouldn't have to be doing this right now, or this should be different, or this should be easier, or I should be more motivated. And it totally comes back to being, I'm going to say all-seeing Albert, because I'd like I'd like the appropriately gendered one for myself. Sure. And it's kind of a similar thing. Yours is the positive framing. Shouldn't you be like all-seeing LB right now? Mine's like, stop shitting all over yourself, dude. Come on.
I think you can yes and that too.
Yes and. Yeah. Yes and, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think, that mental image of someone shitting on themselves. It's great, because it's like, don't do that.
Yeah, why would you do that? Just seems like a waste of resources all around.
And it is. And it's not to say that shame on you for having done that to begin with. It's just saying, now that you recognize you're doing it, stop.
Yeah. And then there are these hilarious recursive patterns where you are being kind of an asshole to yourself.
Yeah.
And then you're like, stop shitting all over yourself. And you're like, I should really shit on myself less. You kind of an asshole to yourself about being an asshole to yourself. And then you can just layer on eventually. And maybe eventually you get to like Nirvana. Nirvana is just like, so many of these layers that you just get to the top and you're like, oh my God, I've exhausted words. We're out.
Yeah. It's just like you run yourself into asshole overdrive and then suddenly you just break.
Right. And you sort of break open. It's like, oh.
I am God and everything is God.
I am. I am.
Okay, everybody, we like to make this podcast about actionable advice. And so just be a huge asshole to yourself until you reach nirvana.
Exactly.
You heard it here first.
Yes, and. So if I try to rein us back in,
yeah,
because you're asking about college admissions, I actually think that it gets at a lot of these questions about how you're seen and how you see yourself. So there's the luck story, and then there's the hard work story. So the luck story goes, I had an English teacher who took an interest in me and said, you should really do this public speaking thing. And what's cool about this public speaking thing is that it's kind of niche. It's the individual debating and public speaking championships format. It's kind of the equivalent of being a world champion, but in curling. It's still really hard to be successful and you have to really work at it, but there just aren't that many kids who are trying to be amazing at curling as opposed to like the 100-meter sprint or something. So there's this form of competition that is niche enough that there aren't a ton of people doing it, but expensive enough that it's still genuinely hard and interesting and gives you an opportunity to grow. So I get dropped into this and I think it's pretty cool. There's prepared speech, there's impromptu speaking, there's prepared reading, which is just about the nerdiest thing I've ever done. A competitive prepared reading. I pick a book, pick some pages, sit in front of a classroom, read to people, put on accents. And then there's this debating part of it as well, which is sort of what you'd expect from high school debating.
And they rank you on the way you read?
Yeah, totally. You have 4 judges. They rank the way that you were reading, the selection of the passage, how expressive you were. And they do that for everything, for the impromptu speaking, for the prepared speech. And I qualified for my high school's team, which meant that I could go to a national competition in South Africa with a couple hundred kids. And at that competition, I placed 11th out of 150. And the national team, the South African national team that would go to the World Individual Debating and Public Speaking Championships, which is appropriately abbreviated to WIDPISC, which, right.
Good thing they got that C at the end.
Yeah, my God. Could you imagine? Yeah. WIDPISC. Nice. So I don't make the national team. And then someone in the top 10 got sick. And not sick, but sick enough that they couldn't go. And so I'm now on the national team and I head off to Australia to compete with students from 25 other countries. And at this competition, I meet some really extraordinary kids. I say kids a lot, including for myself, and employees who are older than me. It's weird. It's a weird turn of phrase. So the kids. And it's in March, April. Everyone's getting college admissions letters. Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Princeton, Middlebury, UNC Chapel Hill. Like, I haven't heard of any of these. I've heard of Harvard because of Angels and Demons and like the Da Vinci Code. And there's this professor in that book called like Robert Langdon or something. He's a symbologist, which may or may not exist, but if it exists, it's definitely taught at Harvard. And so simultaneously, I'm opened up to the fact that there are all these incredible universities that take a very different view of education in the States. And I'm also meeting students who are going to these universities, and they're simultaneously super inspiring, and they've done things I would never have imagined doing. They've taken courses at university, they've written books, they've started nonprofits, they've been involved in volunteer work. This is just not in the bubble of things that you would consider normal for a South African high school student.
No.
But I can also totally relate to them. And I leave thinking, wow, they're really smart, but like, they're not that smart. Like, I could totally hold a conversation with them, right? And I had one of those moments of having my horizons completely expanded. Like, there's this whole other world out there that I could go after. And over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, I basically decided I'm going to go to Harvard. And I made that very niche form of individual debating and public speaking my thing. And by the time I got to 12th grade, I ended up placing, I think, second overall in the world. I mean, high school competition.
Yeah.
And first in the debating section. So what's the lucky aspect of this? Like the lucky aspects, there are tons. Like this English teacher took an interest in me. Someone who literally got sick. The fact that my dad has been involved in political activism and could kind of write my speeches with me and provide that perspective and help me develop my own sense of rhetoric. The fact that my family was well off enough that they could afford to send me to these international competitions where I could go, right? The fact that I was attending a high school where the kind of things you would need to do to really, really show up as unique in an applications process were available to me. Things like some extracurricular activities or teachers who were willing to let me do things that were out of the norm, right? So much of that is lucky. And then the other side of it is I spent literally thousands of hours speaking into mirrors in high school. I would look at recordings from debates from various different formats, and I would watch the first speaker speak. And, well, first I would give the first speaker's speech. Then I would watch them give it. Then I would do it again. Then I would do the speech for the opposing speaker. Then I would watch them do it. Then I would do it again.
Oh my God.
And then I'd go to the second speaker on the other side and do that same thing again and again and again and again with hundreds of debates. And that's like insane. It's insane that I did. Like, I don't know where that level of motivation and focus came from. I can't relate. I can barely relate to that person, but that's a hard work story. And they're both true. And one cannot exist without the other, I don't think.
Yeah. Do you think that? So we have some funny posters at Facebook.
Okay.
And I think I can say this without getting in trouble. We got one that says, "The harder you work, the luckier you get."
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
It does. I hate that it's the kind of poster I'd probably see on a wall in a dentist's lobby with a picture of an eagle or something.
It's like more designy than that. But yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, nice.
I feel you. It's
Some like fun, friendly font.
Yeah.
Next to move fast with stable infrastructure.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, it resonates. It sort of resonates. I don't know why I struggle to sit with that. I think there's this weird dynamic for me, and maybe others relate to this, where I think about my own life that way. I'm like, I have to work really hard, and I have a ton of agency, and I can shape the world around me. And all of this is within my power. Like, I have the power to shape my own destiny. And I live my own life like that. I try to. But I hate the application of that philosophy to other people. Because when you look at folks who are struggling, when you look at people who haven't, quote unquote, made it, like, there are so many reasons that they couldn't do it. Like, one of the tropes that I really, really hated in South Africa, every year, the matric results. Matric was the high school year in South Africa. Everyone writes the same exams would come out. And there would always be some generally like black South African kids who'd grown up in townships with nothing, right? Like a well to pick up water and a generator with a single light bulb under which they did their homework with no access to the internet. And they will have come through the matric process and gotten all A's and like a 98% average. And there'd always be these like older white South Africans who are like, look, there's no systemic problem. Like, you just have to work harder. Like, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And so I struggle with that kind of sentiment because I've seen it weaponized.
Yeah.
And then there's this weird hybrid moment where you're actually trying to coach someone else. And when you're coaching someone, you try to give them that sense of self-efficacy. You're like, hey, like, you can do this. But you also have to be able to say, and if you can't do it, like, it's not necessarily your fault. That's it's a strange tension. So
yeah,
that's why I was struggling with that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for explaining it. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on both parts, right? And you know, one of my favorite, I guess, philosophers nowadays talks about like how you live your life shows what you really believe, and that applies to everybody, right? It's like through your actions, like actions speak louder than words, right? And so this is an interesting tension of, yes, you do believe it for yourself. And also what I see is a belief in that there are these systems that have been designed or maybe are somewhat designed to keep certain groups from maximizing their own ability to be self-efficient.
Right.
Self-sufficient, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think there's room for both. You know, personally, I think both are true. I think you're now the third immigrant who's basically got like the American dream story, right?
Yeah.
Going on for themselves, or really manifesting. You know, one of my other best friends did too. Like he grew up like dirt poor Russian. Like you know, dad joined the military, so and like they would get like they would used to hang their food out the window to freeze it to keep it cold, right? Line up for beats. But his dad joined the military, was like a parachuting guy, and like so they could move to the U.S. Came here with nothing, and like, you know, now he's, you know, living the dream in Manhattan. But then, you know, on the flip side, there's still so much of this other stuff going on that I don't have a good enough picture on to like make a full judgment. But I do get that sense that what you're saying exists.
How many other stories are there?
Yeah.
How many parallel stories for that friend of yours? Yeah.
Yeah. And so far there's actually been a bunch. But
and when I said parallel, I partly meant the American dream story, but I partly meant the other version of him and his life, where he doesn't make it to the States.
Yeah. There's a lot, and then you have to wonder, like, you know, this is the nature and nurture thing, right? How much is environment? How much is you, right? What's the difference? Sometimes, right? Because there always seems to be this two-way street back and forth between you're constantly shaping your environment, and your environment's constantly shaping you, and you can see this in any personal relationship with someone, right? And that to some degree is going on, at least I think, all the time with everything around you. And you know, the question is like, how well are you able to direct your intent outwards, and then also how strong is the pushback, right, coming inwards? And I think that's going to change on an individual to individual basis. And I also think it's really, really, really difficult to look at someone else's life and say what that balance is.
Right.
Right. Because it's hard enough to do it for yourself.
Right.
But what's really interesting to me is that, you know, you do feel it for yourself, at least, that's the case, maybe given the environment you had, that you were able to do that. And that at least to me is very inspiring. And, you know, and you could spend a whole lifetime trying to figure out how to correct the other systems or whatever they might be. So I won't dive any further into that than we have now. So yeah, that was a really cool tangent. Thanks for obliging me.
Of course.
And, also a crazy niche you carved out for yourself. So you became this competitive reader.
reading was one part of it for sure.
That part just stood out. That feels like the most curling part of it to me. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, that one definitely does feel like the most curling part.
Be a little funny about it.
On that note, on the curling reading note, one passage that I managed to find, which I wish I could remember what it was, or I'd love to read it again, is about it's about a man and his wife, and he passes away and he's reincarnated as a parrot. And his wife buys him as the parrot. And it's basically his commentary on all of the other men that come through the house after his passing as a parrot. And I remember putting on a parrot voice in this reading. So I had the narrator's voice. And that's what made it such a good choice, is I got to play around with my vocal cords a bit. And there's the narrator's voice, there's the wife's voice, there's the voices, all of the men coming through, and then there's the parrot's voice.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is is this recorded somewhere?
It's probably somewhere on the internet. Yeah.
Okay, so everyone, if you could YouTube Parrot Joe Kahn.
Parrot Joe Kahn. The problem with Googling or searching for me is that Joseph Kahn, is the music video director for Taylor Swift and just about every other famous artist. So I'm doomed forever to be on page 87 of Google, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see if we can break that barrier. Get you to 86.
Yeah, I just have to start using my middle name, which is Wandile. And then I'm pretty unique, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you heard it here first, folks. Joe is renaming himself.
Joe Wandile Kahn.
There we go. So you do this, you carve out your niche,
Yeah.
and then you apply to Harvard,
Yes.
and you get in.
And I get in.
What was that like? What was getting into Harvard like? How did it stack up your expectations? This is a very prestigious university. I'm curious as to like what that whole experience is like. How did it shape you? Highlights, lowlights, inflection points.
Mm-hmm. So it probably says a lot about me that I got in and I was elated for about a day. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to Harvard. What's next? Yeah. And that part of my psychology it's so core to how I experience the world. And something I'm evolving for sure. But that was my initial experience. It was like, oh my God, it worked. It paid off. And then, okay, like which classes am I going to take? Am I going to survive? Do I like, can I make it there? Should I start studying now? Like, should I start teaching myself things? What's American culture like?
These are important questions though.
Yeah, they're all important questions. And it's also true that taking time to celebrate is huge. Is huge. So, gosh, I mean, a lot was going on at that time. I'd actually just started to get sick, probably a couple months before I got in. So in South Africa, the school year runs from January to December, and in October maybe of that year, I basically overnight lost my ability to eat and lost a bunch of weight. I started to slide into depression, and I'm still undiagnosed, chronically ill. And that backdrop really, I mean, it changed everything for me. And the period between getting in, which was I think December 13th of 2013, and starting, which was in September of the next year, was probably one of the worst of my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I was profoundly depressed. I couldn't really get out of bed. I wasn't motivated to do anything. I didn't see any friends. My relationship with my mom in particular sort of eroded. And yeah, it was like a really hard period. It was a really hard period. And I came out to the States, and everything was colored by this new part of my identity. It was like the disease that I was carrying, whatever it is. And I don't really know where I'm going with this, but that definitely shaped the experience for me in a major way.
How did that, so it sounded like you were pretty deep in the pits. Did that level out at some point and begin changing direction, or?
I don't really think it ever goes away. It's always there. So it's always in the background. I mean, there are many levels here. Physically, no, it didn't level out for a while. And I still struggle with pain and fatigue. As far as the depression goes and the framing around it, I kind of figured it out. I filled my time. I filled my time with people and classes and projects, and tried to. I mean, these are all distractions, right? I think there's something important to be said about mental health in the sense that it kind of has to get worse before it gets better. In some ways, at least that's been my experience of it. I don't want to, it's such a broad and difficult topic, but you can compartmentalize things in some cases and put them in a box and be like, oh, it's just, part of my history, and leave them alone. And then you've got this 3 out of 10 discomfort all the time, but it's there. And 3 out of 10 discomfort over the course of a lifetime, that's hard. That can be really hard. But to really resolve the thing, you have to take it out of the box. And taking something out of the box and really looking at it, that's like 10 out of 10 discomfort. Like really, really coming face to face with it. And I would say that college for me was somewhere between 3 and 5 out of 10 discomfort all the way through until maybe my senior year. And it was right around that point that I sort of said, "Oh, I'm going to figure this out," and started pulling things out of the box. And that's been this big parallel process to starting Karuna and, finishing up school, moving to the West Coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, this is my first time hearing about that. And
yeah, people are often quite surprised that I've got this thing. Yeah.
Well, the more people I talk to, actually, the more I'm realizing that many have gone or are going through something similar.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'd say all of my guests so far, all 5 that I filmed before this, have gone through something similar or are in that state. I don't know. Well, similar, I'd say, not that state. I don't know what it's like for you, but
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, number one, I never know what to say in these situations except that, as far as I can tell, it seems like you've got as good of a handle on it as you can. And thank you for sharing that, because it does take a huge amount of bravery and courage to do that. And I hope that in addition to whatever you've got going on in the background, you also put on your Albert hat and see your bravery as well.
I appreciate that.
And then if it's okay with you, you're talking about, going in, taking things out of this box. And I feel like many of our audience are in here as well. I notice that, like, just broadly on social media, so many people are talking about how they're depressed. Right. And so if there's any tools you could offer, a lot of this podcast is about how do you help people, like, lift themselves out of this as best they can. Right.
It's such a, I can talk about the process that I'm going through. And I guess I have the benefit of being in the process. It doesn't really feel like I'm looking at that much through my rearview mirror at the moment. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, so there's this framework for the stuff that I really like. And it's basically levels of emotion, different types of emotion. And right at the bottom is hiding. So really just like ignoring it, doing everything you can to ignore it. And above hiding, there is, let's call it, I guess in some sense, it's kind of like self-pity. And that can express itself in a lot of ways. It can be like covert contracts with other people and being really angry but not really expressing it. Like, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Right? Mm-hmm. It can be anger. It can just be like straight up anger. Like, fuck this. It can simply just be self-pity. Like, there's nothing I can do. It's just the way it is. It's out of my control. And then there's this level above that, which I've heard described as boredom. And I really like that framing. So boredom is when you realize these patterns that you're in. You're like, wow, like, I am just going through cycle and cycle and cycle of being hostile to myself and others, or of pitying myself. And I'm fucking sick of it. I can see it happening, and I'm tired. I'm just exhausted. I can see what's going on, and I'm not out of it, but I'm tired. And that's like the most important shift, is to take one step up and realize the really, really negative emotion around the experience, at least for me, of depression or around being sick, and getting to a place of, like, I can see it happening. I'm on the hamster wheel. And one step above that is interest. It's like, I wonder why that is. Like, is there something that could be different here? Like, what triggers that pattern, right? And then the final step above that is enthusiasm, which is to say, I have an experiment I'm going to run. I'm tired of this. I'm bored. I think I see a path. Like, let me run at that for a bit. So those like levels of emotional experience have I actually, it's funny. I only actually was given this framework about a week and a half ago.
Oh.
But I realized after hearing about it that it perfectly maps to the journey that I've been on, where I think between high school and college, I was hiding, and then early in college, I was hiding. And then I got to that sort of self-pity and angry space. And that continued for a while. And later, a little post-college, I think I got to boredom. It's like, I cannot believe I'm still stuck here. And only now I'm starting to get to like interest. A tiny little bit of enthusiasm for the puzzle. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I'm not even sure if I answered the question, but that felt like the felt like the best way to layer over it.
Yeah, I think you answered it.
Okay.
Personally, and I would also ask, well, first of all, let me say I haven't felt you being hostile or any of those things you mentioned here.
Yeah, I think it's mostly internal stuff. So the hostility to the self. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess the next question would be that really interests me is, what are these experiments?
What are these experiments?
Yeah, you said after enthusiasm, it's like, well, let's try something different.
Yeah.
What's that look like? Have you gotten there? You said you were at interest earlier.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of really tactical ones around just health and ritual and habits, right? So things like paying a little more attention to nutrition or your sleep schedule. There are others that I really think are more about your own inner voice and trying to identify when you're falling into those patterns and then walking up that recursive ladder and trying new framings for it. That's been really important for me as well. I think it all comes from this greater awareness of the self, where you're trying to find a voice that is authentically yours, but is not one of the voices in your head that can step outside and take a look. And I'm trying on some different voices for size. My coach and I talk about the CEO voice. And CEO voice is firm, high integrity, kind, but not that flexible. So alarm goes off in the morning and didn't get as much sleep as I needed, and I've got an early morning meeting, and the CEO voice says something like, you made a commitment to yourself and others.
Yeah.
Like, you have a responsibility. You have a duty. You have a duty to yourself as a man. You have a duty to your team, to the customers that you serve, and you're going to fulfill that duty. And it's not negative. It's not like, hey, you're lazy or something. It's positive but very firm. So that's one voice, and sometimes that's really effective, and sometimes it isn't. And then there's it's actually funny. Like, it ties back to the voices that you were talking about for Chelsea. And it's the same kind of thing. Yeah. So I think that's one angle, and then another is around holding intentions. Holding intentions for the self, and that is really, really tied up to the boredom and interest parts, where you've realized these patterns that you've fallen into, and you're holding an intention to transform from those patterns. So, one intention that I hold is around self-love, and the way that I think about self-love is holding everything that you are and everything that you can be at the same time, and celebrating the difference. So embedded in that is this idea that you can be more somehow. And also embedded in that is the idea that it's okay where you are, and that's an opportunity for change. So finding ways to harness my ambition, both in the sense of controlling it a little bit and not letting it harm myself or others, but also in the sense of like directing it and being able to really, really leverage it. I think another framing here is the idea of like, what is good enough, right? And so a sort of personal like mantra that I've been running with is like, I am good enough and I can be better, which is very different from I can be better or I must be better. So that's just one intention. I've got a set of, half a dozen that I'm holding at the moment. And with that in the background, it kind of colors every interaction you have with yourself and every interaction you have with others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
That sounded like a lot of yes ands.
Tons of yes ands. Yeah. The tensions in there are a little uncomfortable, or at least they were to start. So get to a place of boredom is the advice. And then try to get in touch with the you that you find most authentic, the you that is most fulfilled, and shape intentions that you can hold around that would be my trite advice to myself 5 years ago.
I don't think it's very trite.
Huh.
I think that was a great summary of everything you just mentioned. If I can add one other philosophical perspective to that, there was a good quote saying that, the acorn is no worse than the oak tree. In the fact, they're both necessary for each other. You can't have an oak tree without an acorn. But that doesn't mean you can't grow. The acorn will grow into the oak tree and eventually vice versa. But
I love this. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful idea.
And it's that potential for growth that makes life interesting. Because imagine if you had nowhere to grow. How boring would this shit? Like, that's real boredom right there. There's nothing to do. Right?
Maybe that would be amazing.
Maybe.
Hard to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, at least my perspective is we'd have nothing to do. Right? If there wasn't progress to be made in name a metric, right? Or name a thing, right? It could be creatively, it could be interpersonally, it could be professionally, whatever, right? If you have nowhere to go, you're in one place, right? Yeah, it might be nice to take a break. That's kind of what meditation is, right? You're chilling in one place. But yeah, I think it adds to the adventure, at least. And, that's, for me, I've had a similar reconciliation done, which was, for a while, not thinking that I was living up to my potential, in particular in high school and college. I really was taking a hard turn against education for a minute. I was like, this is boring. I don't like it. I don't want to do this. I want to party. And
middle school.
Middle school.
That was middle school for me. Oh, sounds like it was a little later for you, but yes, cool.
I'm a late bloomer. And that sort of shaped me into thinking like, wow, I'm really not reaching my potential, and like getting into that loop. And coming out of it, was, the larger perspective, at least for me on life, is saying like, these things are necessary. This tension is necessary to make life exist, even in the capacity that we have it, which is like, you can set a goal and achieve it. You can go do a thing that you want to do, but in order for you to be able to do a thing, you have to have not already done it, right? Or like, it's not a new thing then. Like, this is the concept of novelty itself, right? And what keeps life interesting is that there are new things.
Yeah.
And so, coming to terms with that is hard. And I think for me, it did lead to my own, pits of self-loathing and attacking and drinking too much to cover it up and like all these things, man. But, now I can say years later that I realize like the kind of the necessity of it, and looking back, it gives me a deeper perspective and also ability to resonate with people on these types of things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And
that idea makes me think of a lecture I saw at the San Francisco Zen Center recently, where they were talking about the path to nirvana and the final thing that you let go of being your pride in your own practice.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
That's what Chelsea has told me, a similar thing. She did like a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and in order to reach that state, you get to like the final door through devotion, is what she calls it, through discipline, through mental yearning for God, but then in order to get through, you have to drop it. If you're like, I don't care, it doesn't matter, and then you get there. It's like the funniest thing. It's so backwards. But that said, so this is a good transition into kind of the next section. So we've really gone over your sort of origin story, We talked about a lot of low points, thorny issues. I want to, well, yeah, I want to actually get into one other thing, right? So as we're examining these low points, I want to see, like, did they ever turn into like light bulb moments for you? Did you find any sort of benefit out of them, or were they just like shit?
Eventually, basically every low point becomes a light bulb.
Can you trace any specific light bulb moments to those low points? Like, if I didn't go through this shit, I wouldn't have done that.
Oh, I mean, the easiest one is getting sick, where, I mean, you spoke about stories. Like I think there've been like two profound low points in getting sick for me, and one of them was, I think I'd just been given a diagnosis for something, a really, really rare congenital disorder. And the implication was that the only way I was going to get better was with a pretty extreme surgery. And I'm sitting with this and thinking to myself, I really need to do what I can to make sure that this is right, that they didn't mess up the diagnosis. And so I started crawling through all of my medical records, which is a terribly broken system in the United States. I mean, it's in different systems. There's duplication. There's no standardized format. So I'm manually transcribing PDFs and faxes, and I've purchased a way to load up a little CD-ROM onto my Mac so I can pull stuff off that. I've got floppy drives, right? And I'm slowly putting this all into a Google Doc. And at some point, I'm reading this note, and I suddenly see that the diagnosis I had just been given was explicitly ruled out by a different physician 2 years earlier, in line 18 of a 50-line paragraph. And that was easily the worst moment I've had being sick. I curled up in a ball and cried for hours. There was just this profound sense of being completely alone. Like, no one else was looking. I was the only person who could look after myself. I was the only person who could carve a path through the healthcare system. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know what I could do. I don't know anything about human anatomy, right? And that moment very clearly traces to the work that I'm doing now, where everything that we do is around trying to figure out how to make it as easy as possible for every single patient to feel like they have a friend in the system, someone who is just there for them and keeping an eye. So that's an example where I took a set of experiences that I'd had and directly funneled them into my work, right? Trying to turn every terrible experience that I had with the healthcare system into user research, into a user interview. That could then shape what we would eventually try to do, right?
So just to recap, you went through, you found out another physician had outruled that diagnosis.
Right.
And you're like, there's no way he has this.
Yeah.
And that moment was that initially joyous to know, like, I don't have this thing, or did you just...
No, because who should I believe? And this makes it even scarier that I might do the surgery thing.
Right. Yeah.
And are the physicians paying enough attention? Like, did they check? Did they read the records? Like, do they know that this was ruled out and they just failed to mention that, hey, we know that someone else thought this wasn't a thing, but we really think it's a thing?
Right. Who do you trust?
Yeah. Can't trust anyone. Yeah, it was a heavy moment.
And you're how old?
I was probably 20, maybe.
Oh my God.
And I'm on a different continent.
Jesus.
And I have no family in the States and no money. And my parents are 40 hours away and in a completely different time zone. So that was hard. But those experiences have shaped and motivated the work that I'm doing in healthcare.
Wow. This is, I've heard a decent amount of stuff recently doing these interviews, but that's a new one.
It's funny how that's not like, oh, my symptoms were really bad, right? Or like I was in pain. It's fundamentally actually just about not being seen.
Yeah, and that because you're right that my surface level assumption or my assumption would have been like, oh, you don't have the disease yet, right? But that's an even deeper thing of like, can I even trust the system itself that everyone says you can trust, right? And so now you're tackling that problem,
Right.
Which is again crazy brave and ambitious of you, I think.
Thanks.
So, yeah, and
Yeah, we were just trying to solve one piece of it. It's gonna require a lot of people coming together.
yeah, I don't think 10 people can do it.
Don't think so.
Okay, so this feels like it was like the spark that lit the match to get you doing.
Yeah, I'd had in the back of my mind that I was going to try to work in healthcare and solve for some of the experiences I had. But that was the moment of just like emotional energy where it's like, no, fuck this. Like this has to change.
That's a powerful emotion.
That emotion is very powerful.
Yeah, like when you have a real one, not just a casual fuck that.
Yeah.
Right? That's huge.
Yeah. Trying to figure out if that fits into like the boredom or enthusiasm thing. The answer is kind of both.
I feel like it's enthusiasm. It's like it's because you're enthusiastically angry.
You're
right?
enthusiastically angry.
Like when do you get like,
yeah,
you know, it's not like passive aggression, right? You're like, fuck this. Like how can this not work, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's insane because like our society is predicated on that working, right? That's a fundamental building block of everything we see around us. Is you can trust the medical system, and I think in many cases you can, but like in this acute personal case, like that is just absurd to have that contradicting information about something that's so critical.
Nothing could be more important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, like your life. Fuck, dude, that's insane. Wow. So what? So that's a huge one, I guess. You said there were a couple.
Oh, one other. I had a really. My dad was visiting me in San Francisco in 2017, and I just had a moment of intense pain, and it's happened over the last 5 years related to this chronic illness, and sometimes I'm just like doubled over, and I didn't know what to do, so I lay down on the floor, and he lay down on the floor with me. He didn't say anything. There's nothing he could do. He just like got on the floor and lay there, trying to, I guess, recreate my own experience in his. And that was a really profound moment. To be in that helplessness and have someone meet you there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what's the light bulb there? I think the light bulb there is probably around acceptance. Like, sometimes all you can do is like lie down in the hole you're in and be okay with that. And try to surround yourself with people who are willing to get in the hole as well. You can't stay there forever, but you can't just jump out either.
Yeah, beautifully said. and thanks for sharing that too. That's
happy to.
My Lord. Wow. So, and did you after college? Did you go straight to starting Karuna?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, started it in my senior year. Spent a year doing research and just trying to talk to everyone I could, and had some immigration stuff. So I actually had to I was forced to take a holiday, which is kind of great. Between we raised a pre-seed of funding when I was like in my senior spring, probably in March or April. And, when that was happening, I was on part-time OPT, which is a kind of employment authorization that allows you to do work while being international and being a student. And then there was this gap between that ending and having to get my next type of employment authorization a couple months later. But, after that passed, I think I was able to get working again probably in July or so. I forget the exact dates. And have been sprinting on it since then.
Okay. So yeah, that's a lot. And I'm going to ask a question that I ask everybody next is, as you look back, if anything, what would you change?
But my entire life?
Yeah.
I wouldn't change anything. I'm here now.
What makes you say that?
I mean, it's yeah, I can talk about things that were painful that maybe pain I wouldn't have liked, or it would have been nice to not have to go through. But it is the whole of all of that puts me here now, and puts me in a position where I could even have the perspective to think about what I might want to change. So to separate out where I am and the awareness of self that I'm developing and the journey I'm on from the journey I have been on, like, that's impossible for me. I can think of things that I wish I hadn't done to other people. I might change some of those where maybe it was a lesson I'd already learned and I didn't really need to learn it again. Right. And other people were hurt because of that. But I can't think of anything large in that category. And I wouldn't say the same about the flip side, where something negative happened to me a couple times until I finally got it. Yeah. I have this image in my mind of the Lion King with Rafiki the monkey and Simba the lion, and Rafiki's hitting Simba with a calabash or something. Like hitting him on the side of the head until he gets it.
Yep.
So sometimes you need that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen to that, man. I've had my own share of those too.
Yeah.
It's like life kind of just like,
hey, listen.
Well, that's a really intriguing answer. And especially interesting because that's also basically what everyone else has said too. Right. And I think a really Albert-like answer, right, is, these dark points, when looked at individually, are really, really shitty. But then when you zoom out a bit, you realize like they were necessary to shape who you've become. And I think if you're satisfied, generally speaking, with who you've become, you don't want to change it. And so maybe I can offer that too. I'm feeling that that's a sense of satisfaction, is I wouldn't change anything,
Yeah. I think satisfaction is part of it. It's hard for me to sit with that one because I'm so aware of the ways that I want to evolve. But the awareness itself of the ways that I want to evolve, I'm very satisfied with that.
Well, that's a good start.
Yeah, we're going up that recursive ladder again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Gosh. I really love the metaphor of kintsugi, the broken bowl that is stitched together with a golden resin or even with gold. Have you come across this?
No.
I believe that it is a Japanese art form where if you break a glass or pottery or something and you have all of these pieces on the ground, you'll put it back together with a golden resin. And so you see the cracks in gold. And then the idea is that the broken and repaired ornament is more beautiful than the original could ever have been.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I've heard similar. I've heard a similar analogous.
I'm never sure. Like, I've got my South African pronunciations and my American ones, and I swap between them. I'm like, I don't know. Those both sound good.
Well, sure. Well, I'd say I've heard analogous stories where it's like you're kind of like weaving a tapestry.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite ones is like of light and dark. And, if it's all just one ball of light, it's just a ball of light, right? But if you weave in some darkness, those are like the cracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get something that's much more multidimensional. So that's your past. But if I gave you a magic wand, would you change anything about your current situation?
I'm going to guess that there's a tension and that people would probably change parts of their current situation, but they wouldn't change parts of their past situation.
I'm not going to tell you till you answer.
That's fair. Yeah, in places where I am aware of the gap between how I am expressing my values today and how I think my values ought to be expressed. I'm shitting on myself right now. There are definitely moments where I kind of wish I could just like snap my fingers and jump forward in time. And I mean, I can give you point examples, like empathetic listening is one for sure. Being, kind and compassionate with myself is another, unequivocally. Being more in touch with my own needs and feeling comfortable really asserting them with myself and with other people. Like, I could give you a list of 30 things that I'm working on, that I'm evolving on. And if I could speed up those processes a little bit, like, that'd be great. I'd probably do it. And a really good friend of mine recently pointed out to me the irony in that statement, because one of my intentions is being more okay with the journey. So it's like I am trying to jump to a place of being more okay with the journey by not really being okay with the journey.
Right.
I'm wanting to skip. So yeah, the reality is I would absolutely like push myself forward there. But the journey is the journey. And I'm going to get to somewhere even a week from now. And if you ask me, well, yeah, would you have changed the last week? I would probably say no.
These are interesting positions to hold. You got patient Paul and impatient Isaac duking it out.
It's funny that it reminds me of a...
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was like, you had put your phone on silent. I forgot to do mine.
Wow, that was so loud.
Yeah, it comes out of the speakers.
It reminds me of a thought experiment where someone is having this extraordinary life, and all of a sudden they wake up, unsurprisingly. Lots of thought experiments involve waking up. And you're in a lab, and people have lab coats on, and they say, all right, hello, Mrs. Kahn. How was it the last 10 years? And you're like, oh, fuck, okay. And take a moment to reset. And then it turns out that you're well aware of the situation you're in. And you've opted in to a program where you have your real life. And then you have this infinite menu of lives you can choose from. And you dive back in to the life you were living, your real life, or the life you were just simulating, or a new life. And so you're asked the question, would you like to go back in? Or would you like to review the menu and choose something else? And I think most people assume that in this thought experiment, you would always go back to reality. It's such a weird thing. Like, okay, cool, I tried this thing out. And it turns out that when you ask people, and obviously it's self-reported and it's kind of fluffy, if their real life is not that great on some dimension that's important to them, like, they would choose to go back into what is effectively the matrix almost all the time. And that's just an interesting tension to what we're talking about right now, where I'm saying I wouldn't change anything about my past. But if I could change my present, like, would I do it? And how far would you extend that? Like, would I know that personally, like, I wouldn't jump into someone else's journey or what I would perceive as someone else's journey. Like, I'm on mine. But it's a very, very interesting extension of that question.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things I could jump into right there. And I want to touch on the Matrixy one.
Okay.
Because, well, first of all, I think it's so interesting that movie came out and it resonates so well still to this day, that concept. I want to counter that with a similar base idea, which is that living multiple lives, or being able to jump in or reincarnate, essentially is what this boils down to, right? But with a different perspective on it, where instead of coming out of it in a lab, right, and there being some people walking around in like this kind of cold technological aspect of it, or like in the Matrix, we're being drained of our life force by an alien, whatever, right? And this is an Alan Watts-ism, actually, where he talks about if you were able to dream any dream that you wanted to dream, where you would dream 80 years at a time, but you'd wake up realizing only a night had passed. Because that can happen in dreams, funnily enough, right?
Right.
Is you dream for weeks at a time sometimes, or like you didn't even know how much time has passed, and you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm here, I gotta go to work. And then, but if you could dream any dream, and these dreams last 80 years, what would you do? What would you dream? And he says, you would be exactly where you are right now. And to top it off, and he also says, and this I subscribe to a lot, that the fundamental nature of the universe is play. Where the reason you're doing the dreams is because you want to do the dreams, not necessarily because it's better or worse than what the other existence is, but because you're playing. You know, and there's, and what really intrigues me most is like when I hear these answers from you and other people, like I wouldn't change anything. It's like, well, why wouldn't you? Like that sounded really painful. But then you're saying to me that this has shaped you to be who you are, and it's almost like, you know, if you're playing a game and the other team scores some points, you know, and then it becomes a really close game at the end, and that's way more exciting than a shutout, isn't it? Right? And so if you look at it through the lens of play, like what's the most exciting story? You can tell. It's ones with drama, with ups and with downs. It's not just like I was perfect the whole time, right? And in fact, he addresses that in the dreams. He's like, maybe the first time you did this, you were slaying dragons and fucking bitches getting money and right, rescuing princesses and just winning everything all the time, and then you got bored of that. You know, he said, I want something that's a little more real, right? Not, you know, like not like a Marvel movie where you're like, everyone's got plot armor on and you know they're gonna make it and there never really feels like any danger, right? But something truly gritty. And, you know, that's his interpretation of what we're doing here. So I don't know, that maybe, I hope that resonates with the audience and you.
And the idea of if you were dreaming 80 years at a time, you would be right here. What does that mean to you?
So to me, that says I'm doing at the highest level, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. And that gives me a big sense of peace. You know, and that didn't hit me until I was like 25, 26, and I got really into Watts and other philosophers, and you know, I got a stack of books. That's
I see the stack.
Yeah, and a stack of books behind you and in the room on like, what the fuck is life? Is the core question. What are we doing here? Like that thing that we all are curious about, but no one's talking about, right? Which is why I made this podcast. It's like, what the fuck are we doing here? And why do we think it's worth doing? And why wouldn't you change that, right? Because at surface level analysis, you're like, well, duh, I'll change that. So for me, it means that, yeah, at the highest level, I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing by being here. Even if in the moment I'm like, fuck, this sucks, right? And I realize like, okay, maybe given my ability to reflect and hear these other stories, I look back, and when everyone looks back and they say, I actually wouldn't have changed that thing that sucked, it helps me get through the thing that sucks, and gives me that enthusiasm to want to move through it in the best way possible. I have another really wise friend of mine, and you know, she's one of Chelsea's best friends, and she's had a pretty traumatic life, like just lost her dad recently. She has a fused spine, so she can't bend it, and you know, she has this phrase about moving through trauma, right? And there's a way you can almost dance through it, right? But you can only dance if you're like more lighthearted, right? If you're giving into the push and the pull, and you know when to move, when to not, when to lie on the ground, but when to get out of the ground or off the ground, right? Because you can't stay on the ground forever, but sometimes you need to be on the ground, right? So it's that dynamism, you know, and taking the broader Albie perspective, right, is saying like, okay, well, on one level, I think I do want to be here doing this. On another level, fuck this. But broadly, like, you know, maybe there's going to be something for me. You know, the broader abstract of this is called the hero's journey. Right. Which is, dude, if it's not fraught with some sort of danger, like, you're not going to do anything. Right? But when you wonder, like, how, well, like risk reward, right? Like, what's the proportionality between those two things? You know, and yeah, and I think there's a sweet spot between them, and it's finding that is the dance.
It's definitely a dance. And the question is always, well, if we work with that metaphor, who's leading is, I think, a really important question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you pushing? Are you demonstrating the steps? Are you allowing life to pull you through? Those questions of lightness as well are very interesting to me. Things I struggle with, where on one hand, pain is resistance in some ways. And on the other, if you are to change, if you are truly to change the world around you, that's not going to happen by just letting it be.
No.
And so it implies that a life is a life of pain and fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps, maybe that's the implication.
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
Buddhists would agree, although they say it's all pain.
Right.
It's just suffering.
Well, life is suffering.
Yeah. To me, that feels like just one of the many
Mm-hmm.
perspectives you could have.
It's kind of a freeing perspective, though.
Sure. Oh, wow. That's almost like the just be an asshole infinitely till you reach nirvana.
It kind of is. Yeah.
Just suffer infinitely.
Well, ironically, if your perspective is that life is suffering and you truly believe that, then you won't suffer. Because at least that's how I experience suffering. Like I suffer when I wish it were different.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Yeah.
But if you don't wish it were different, it is never different.
It becomes accepting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things I'm not going to accept.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, I would say I found the same as that. And acceptance can be very difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. It sounds easy to do. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm fine with it. But to actually be fine with it, whole nother ball game.
I think the best you can ever do is be fine with it in that moment.
Yeah.
None of these things are stable.
I think it's yes to that, and be fine with it and do the appropriate thing. Right? It's like your house on fire. Oh, I'm fine with this. Like that meme. Have you seen with the dog sitting there? This is fine. It's like, okay, sure, and get the fuck out of the house, right? Like, if you want to continue living, right? Like, there's a yes, accept, and actually this book, I have a little tiny book over there that is called How to Love. And it talks about love as not just being this thing where it's, just good emotions and good feelings. And like, that's what we normally associate love with, is like a box of chocolates, right? Like, or roses given to your lover, and like everything is perfect. It's like love starts with, or the book says, love starts with seeing something for exactly how it is. And that's not easy. That means taking your ideas of the thing, your predispositions, your biases, and out the window with those. I'm going to look at the thing for what it is. And then the next step is acting appropriately. And that can be on the floor. It can be kind. It can be get angry sometimes, right? If someone punches you in the face, I mean, Jesus, like, turn the other cheek, but, be true to yourself, right? That's loving yourself, is seeing, how do I like to react in these situations? And then not just you in the current situation, but then you across time, because I like to react right now angrily.
Yeah.
But what I've realized over time of reacting angry is, like, I don't like the way that people treat me after I act angrily, right? So maybe I should stop being so angry, right? Because I prefer to have that lasting relationship more than the in the moment anger release.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a crazy game. It's a crazy dance.
A mentor of mine talks about the miracle of being human, not as our positive virtues, but as the reality that we do not act on so many of our negative impulses. It is the true acknowledgement of all that is dark and cruel in who we are. And then recognizing that we basically never act on those things. At least most people don't.
Yeah.
And that is the miracle, not just that we are virtuous sometimes.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. Until a crazy left-wing dictatorship takes over, like in Germany or China or Russia or Cambodia.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you see people flip a switch. It's so weird, right? Like, how many, like literally hundreds of millions of people died. So it's not like, so yes, I think it's a miracle. And I don't think that it's so out of our realm of not acting on. Because you just have to look back like 40 years, right? 50 years.
Look around today.
Yeah. Well, it's not that bad, I would say. Like,
In some places it is.
well, yeah, China's got concentration camps. But
Myanmar,
yeah.
Yemen.
Yeah, those are still there for sure.
Yep.
And that's like not something that's talked about at all, but that's millions of people. I can't even picture a million people. A football stadium is what, 100,000? Something like that?
Maybe it's football's not a thing back home for me.
Well,
It sounds like it's about 100,000.
Yeah, something like that. So 10 football stadiums of people is a million. That's insane. So yeah, and I think part of it is recognizing that we do have that proclivity, right? If possessed by, I think, dangerous ideologies would be one way to put it, right? And coming to terms with that, right? Like, fuck, dude, we do have a really dark side. And I think you're right that not acting on it is the crazy miracle, and one that we need to keep up and that we really shouldn't get rid of, right? Like, thank you for calling that out, because like this is something I think we all need to be aware of. The fact that we aren't all, in fact, the vast majority of us aren't murderers or rapists.
Right. The fear of who I might actually be. Like if you think about the self in layers, where it's, you know, who I want to be, who I'm afraid I might be, and who I am. It's all true. Like who I am afraid I might be, like that's all in there. It's all in there for sure. But who I am, like that's, I think that's more in our control than we would think. It's not necessarily like a pure essence of being. It's like, what is the purest expression of who you are, of your values?
This is a great question to ask yourself repeatedly
Mm-hmm.
on a daily basis.
Who am I?
Who am I? For real, because we never ask that. It's the most basic thing ever, right?
Yeah.
And it depends on like, yeah, it's like, what do you mean by I also? Do you mean the front that you put up around people to fit in? Do you mean underneath all that? Do you mean the voice in your head? Do you mean the sum of all your actions? Right? Do you mean consciousness itself? Right? Like, oh my God.
All of the above.
Yeah. Right. And then what are those things to you? Also, you know, I'm just going to differ on a personal basis. Right. And so I think that, yeah.
I've got the Les Mis soundtrack in my head right now, thinking about who am I? Do you know the song?
Can you sing it in a parrot voice?
Can I sing it in parrot? I'm really tempted to try. Who am I? Who am I? John. Phil John. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Sure.
Hats off to the parrot voice.
Hats off to the parrot voice and to my probably misremembering the lyrics.
It's all good here. It's all good.
Yeah. Safe space for parrots.
I was about to say. This is not a cage. It is safe. Oh boy. Well, yeah. So just So it's a little. If I could just recap that real quick. Some more actionable advice. You know, as we started with like, okay, what is love actually, and seeing something for what it is, and then it's how to see yourself for what you are. And one good way to start doing that is asking yourself, well, who am I? And and do that on a situational basis. Who do I want to be? How do I want to be? Even because you have that juxtaposition between you now and you later, right? And what is my ideal version of me, and how would that person act, rather than the worst in your subjective sense version of you. So yeah. I do want to move on, though. I want to keep this moving because we have a few more to get through.
Let's do it.
So we talked already about, you know, a moment or you were afraid, meeting, with the reality of not being able to trust the medical system. And we actually did talk a bit how you dealt with depression
Mm-hmm.
on a large scale basis, but I want to ask how you deal with fear in general.
Fear. I don't think that's something that I've reflected on that much, the sense of being afraid. I guess fear could be defined as fear is one expression of seeing the gap between where you are and where you want to be, right? Right. You can celebrate that, or you can be afraid that you won't cross the gap, or you'll cross it but not fast enough. How do I deal with that? Well, I think the honest answer is that a lot of the time the coping mechanism for that is paralysis. It's actually freezing and becoming anxious, scattered, procrastinating. These are all, if that is fear, then those are all coping mechanisms. And I've certainly leaned on all of those in the past. I think that my framing around fear is more like fear of the other. Right. So I'm looking at this gap that I want to cross. And I'm afraid of jumping and missing. And my general mechanism is to say, well, what if I didn't jump? And the fear of not jumping, the fear of what that would mean, like that has always in my life overpowered the fear of jumping and missing. So I don't generally perceive myself as like someone who takes a lot of risks or is like highly risk tolerant, because the real risk has always been not jumping. Like there is no alternative. The coping mechanism for fear is that it's the only way out is through.
That's a really good quote as well. And okay, so you catch yourself after you catch yourself freezing or making a conscious decision to not jump. What are the times when you do jump, and how do you overcome that fear of jumping?
I always jump. Eventually, I always jump.
Okay. This is interesting. So what is that? How do you go from fuck this, I'm not jumping, to taking that leap?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there are a couple parts to it. One is the acknowledgement that if you're going to jump and you know you're going to jump, you'd better give yourself the best shot. Like you got to let go of the weight, and try to get as much airtime as you can. And that means letting go of the anxiety and the procrastination, and letting go of holding on too hard to exactly what the jump should look like, and acknowledging that just any jump is better than none at all, right? So all of the aspects of fear that are paralyzing, like I think there has to be this recognition that if you are going to jump and you know you're going to jump, you best position yourself well to make the gap. And that's a place where on that emotional spectrum we spoke about earlier, I think I'm kind of at like the boredom and interest phase, where I can see myself, I can see my blood pressure rising, and I dive anyway, and sometimes I sometimes I struggle, or I don't make it quite as far as I wanted to, or that you might even fail a little bit. And realizing that you have to have the mindset of simultaneously being ready to jump and jumping as far as you can, but also like freeing yourself of the emotional weight of the jump. So I think I'm struggling to articulate this, that
was great.
Okay.
I want to zoom in on what is that process of letting that weight go. You said letting go of the anxiety, right? Do you have a process that we could share with our audience?
Yeah. So if you know you're going to do the thing, and it's no longer a question of, am I going to do it well enough? It's just like, I have to do it. Like, there's no choice. Once you're there, you then have to immediately get into the yes and mindset of being okay with good being good enough. Because holding on to more than that, like, you've already made the decision to sprint as hard as you can. So holding on to more than that is I think, only going to slow you down. Or at least that's how I experience it.
And do you have a process for letting that go? Like mental steps you walk through, physical steps?
No, right now it still kind of feels like I'm jumping out the plane time after time after time and figuring out which process feels right on the way.
Are there any that you wouldn't advise, or like any that have like gone okay? Like, what is?
I mean, the only one that really fails is to be frustrated with yourself for like getting stuck in the first place. Yeah, because that's just reinforcing.
Don't shit on yourself.
Don't shit on yourself. Yeah. Honestly, that's huge. I mean, like I that's been a major shift for me in these moments where it's hard. I'd get into this mindset sometimes of like, oh, if I was truly intrinsically motivated, like, this feel easy, or I'd be motivated by this, or I'd be excited right now. Like, I wouldn't be afraid. Like, I would be excited, and that's how I would know. And getting to a place where I'm like, no, like that's silly. This is hard. This is scary. Like, this sucks, and like that's why it matters. That's why it's meaningful. That's been an important evolution for me.
This is cool. So there's a tie-in between the amount of difficulty it has and the amount of meaning you get. Did I hear that correctly?
It's not quite that, because I think the conclusion of that is that only the most difficult things are most meaningful. I'm not sure that's it. I think it's more that, like, the expectation that if it was truly meaningful, it wouldn't feel effortful. Like, that's something to let go of. Like, you're working on a project that you care about, and you question, do I really care that much, because it's a Friday night and you're lonely and you want to go out with friends? Or you're exhausted and you really feel like you should be energized right now doing this work that you love. Like, why am I tired? Like, I shouldn't be tired. If I really cared, if this were really the right thing, I'd be stoked right now. And like, letting go of that, that's been important. So it's more like letting go of the negative than holding the positive.
Makes sense. Yeah, I can think of two examples on either end. Whereas like some of my friends are new parents, and God, if you had that idea of I should never be tired when caring for my kid, oh, good fucking luck.
Oh yeah, like I'll only know I love with my child if I'm like constantly energized by my time with them.
Yeah, no way.
Yeah, not a chance.
Yeah, they've got a second one now, and they're like, that just doesn't happen.
Right.
And then the other one about meaning necessitating effort is like, just go watch a sunset. It doesn't take any energy. I mean, getting there maybe, but like, just sit there, like you were talking about earlier before we were on air, is just sitting in nature, right? You're just sitting there. God, is it meaningful? Jeez, it might be hard to articulate, but it's meaningful.
Yeah.
Right? You're just like, oh my God, the awe and majesty around you. So this is cool, because it almost sounds like this is another yes and situation where you can't prescribe a formula necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Except don't shit on yourself. It seems to be a good one that's sticking.
It's like, that one definitely sticks, I think, throughout all of this stuff. Yeah.
It's some sticky shit, man. Cool. So that actually does answer quite a few things. But I want to flip this around now. And can you tell me a moment of great inspiration? And then broadly, how inspiration shows up in your life?
Moment of great inspiration, listening to the Saint-Saëns organ symphony recently at the San Francisco Symphony was pretty blissful. When you ask that question, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm like, I wonder if there are moments of inspiration in my work. And then I immediately get into like, there must be, right? Because I care about my work. And if I don't find inspiration in my work, then I don't care about my work. And as it happens, I don't think that I draw Like when I think about where I get inspiration, like where I get like deep energy from, like sometimes it's work, sometimes it's wins at work. I think often it is seeing people on the team potentiate. Like that is super inspiring to me. But the true energetic sources of inspiration for me are in music and nature. And that's funny. It's funny to observe that and try to be okay with it. And I was literally just preaching about how it's important to not be in a place where you have this self-belief that, you know, for it to be really genuine that what you're doing, you have to love it all the time. And now here I am struggling with the same thing where I'm like, I really wish I could give you an inspirational example, like from The Office. And I'm like, no, my inspirational example is like feeling just a little cold and looking out at the sunset in Yosemite.
Yeah.
Or listening to music, or feeling deeply connected to another person about just an experience that they're going through. Right? Like holding an empathy room open for them and just having like roaring waves of sound in that room. Like those are moments of inspiration that I can point to examples of all of those in the last couple of weeks.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And do you find that inspiration translates into anything? Like, so you feel inspired and then do you do something with it? Or how do you integrate it, I guess, is really the question.
I don't know if I figured that out yet. When I think about my work as tied to my purpose, I'm just always doing it. So I'm always working, I'm always on this journey, I'm always pushing. And it's less that moments of inspiration result in me showing up at the office with a bunch of whiteboards and like my hair all over the place and just like, you know, having a crazy moment of genius. And it's more just a like sense of flow and peace in the work that I'm doing. That sometimes comes from those moments of inspiration, and sometimes it's completely unrelated. But at its best, I think that moments of inspiration translate into finding a flow state. And a flow state is, in some sense, having decided to jump and cross that gap, and then being truly present with the process in that moment. So I think they fuel each other, but if I had a more direct mapping, I would be heading out to Yosemite every weekend.
I feel you there. The flow state's a really interesting one, and this is an area that I think is becoming broadly interesting to society now, as it becomes more public. And I actually kind of want to develop a question on here. So you're witnessing the inception of a new question I'm going to ask everyone else, which is, so you've just described flow state to me. And I have had my own moments of that, and I agree, you know, whether it's like snowboarding, although I'm horrible at it, or even the other day I was doing a spreadsheet at work, and I was just, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do it well, I'm going to be one with it, and just did it, you know. And I've had that many times actually, the more I look back at work, and it seems to be the optimal state for doing a thing, right? And what I want to ask you is, do you have any processes for entering that state?
So one of them is stress inoculation, which is an exercise you can do where you basically just say, okay, here's this thing I got to do. I got to send an update to some investors, or I got to do a performance review for my employees. And you're procrastinating and you don't really want to do it, and you're tired and it's hard and you really want to do it right. So you're nervous about starting it at all, right? All of those emotions. And the process is to basically sit and say, okay, I'm not going to actually do it. I'm going to visualize myself doing it. And I am going to literally picture the steps that I would be taking to get this done. I'm sitting down, I'm opening my computer, I'm going to my email, I'm looking for this email, then I'm going to open a notepad, I'm going to write some stuff down, right? And then try to imagine what the emotional experience of that will be like. Like, all right, I'm feeling anxious, or like I'm stressed, or I really want to get this right. And then pause. Say, okay, cool. Like, I think I know what that's going to be like. And then give yourself a really easy starting point. You're like, I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to take the first step. I'm just going to open my inbox. I'm going to go find that email. That's it. And that's all you have to do. If that's all you do, you've been successful. But if you do that and you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. Like my emotional experience isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. It seems a little easier than I thought it might be. Then just kind of let yourself fall into it. And sometimes I do fall into it and sometimes I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the biggest barrier is, for me at least, like one, it's literally just getting started on any given task. And two is saying, all right, I have like 100 things that I have to do, and I'm going to actually just do one of them right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give myself permission to stop worrying about whether or not I prioritize my top 10 in the perfect order, or if maybe 5 really should have been 3.
Mm-hmm.
And to just let go of that. So I think it's a combination of like getting started and then letting go of the question of like, is this really the thing that I should be doing right now, or is there something else that I should have been focused on? So that's the process I try to follow. I think the part that I struggle with most is the prioritization piece, where it's like, wait, I actually have like 35 things that are all urgent and they often affect other people.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get okay with doing one of them? And I think part of that then comes back to the question of like taking that jump, where if all of those things are really important, like maybe some are more important than others, but they all cross the threshold of being like fundamental, then you're going to have to do all of them eventually. It doesn't really matter which one you do first. Like you have to do all of them. And the only way you're going to do all of them well is if you do them one at a time. So it's this idea that like, okay, I'm chosen to jump. I'm going to jump, and now I need to make sure that I'm not carrying too much weight as I take that leap. Yeah,
I like that. That
super easy to say out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of these things are. But the good news is that means it's easy for people to listen to and retain.
I hope so.
So to recap that, if I were to summarize it, and this sounds pretty similar to my process, which is you make a rough outline of what needs to be done and you kind of picture yourself doing it, and then you just start and you check in with yourself and you say, how is this? Generally, what I find as well is like, fine, we'll keep going. At a rare occasion, it's fuck this. All right, I really shouldn't be doing this. I'm struggling too hard. I'm going to do a different thing on my list of 10 things. Right. And that's kind of how you like find, for me at least, the point of entry that feels the most right.
Yeah.
So it involves a couple things. It involves, number one, being able to sketch an outline. Number two, being able to somewhat imagine the process, which kind of goes hand in hand, and how you might feel. And then number three, being able to actually pay attention to how you feel in the moment, which luckily I think we can all do. So there's the good news for everybody. And the prioritization problem, I think, is another crazy one. That's something I deal with a lot. As I made the spreadsheet yesterday, I realized I had like 54 parallel projects. And I was like, 30 of which were high pride. Yeah. The other 24 were mid pride. And I was like, how do I do, but again, I think, there's many frameworks of prioritization out there, but part of it is finding whatever your top some are and then feeling into how it feels to work on them. Because I think that we have an intuitive capacity that you're leaning on as well that we don't really talk about. And it's how do I feel in the moment doing this thing? Right. And sometimes, and this is why they say follow your gut, right? It's smarter than your brain. It's your second brain, and also produces all the neurotransmitters that your brain uses. So you can lean on that and work your way through and find like the path of least resistance through the forest of your work. Cool. So a new question that everyone's going to be asked now. What's flow and how do you find it?
That's a good one.
Well, thank you for mentioning it and fleshing it out. That was a team effort.
It was definitely a team effort.
Yeah. I do want to keep it moving though. So, gosh, we've dived into a lot of things and we have a decent amount left actually. But I think this is going to be a lot easier. So I want to talk about how well you know yourself, since that was one of the core questions, right? And this is what we're going to do here is focus on like how well you know yourself, and then also actionable advice we can give to other people to help themselves to get them to know themselves better. And so I want to start with, what key character attributes you attribute to your success.
So I struggle with questions like this because giving myself like positive character attributes is a hard thing. It's like I'll raise them and be like, like, is that really true? Like, here are these counterexamples. But if I try to be generous to myself for a moment, I would probably say drive, and just like a really powerful engine. Resilience in terms of like being able to go through a lot and just keep going. Like drive and resilience are tied to each other for me. It's called synthesis. Like the ability to take a lot of competing information and try to make sense of it is something that I've really been able to benefit from. And I think another would be like knowing how to ask for help. And that really ties to the synthesis thing. Like being willing and able and like actively seeking out support from others. Yeah, that feels right. Drive, resilience, knowing how to ask for help. Synthesis, yeah.
And which of those came naturally to you, and which do you have to develop?
Ooh. I think the synthesis one is probably one that was developed over time more than the others. Like the drive and resilience pieces feel pretty innate. Like the willingness to be very transparent and open and ask for help, like that feels like that's been there for a very long time. The synthesis piece is something that is developed starting when I was in middle school, probably with the debating and public speaking stuff, and then just became a really, really core strength that I leaned on and really valued. Like I liked that about myself. And I think naturally continues to develop it over time.
And how do you go about developing this?
Oh, how do you develop something like that? I have no idea.
Fair.
A healthy skepticism for your own ideas is probably a big part of it.
Okay.
All of these things have trade-offs, right? Like the flip side of that is I'm extremely analytical and over analytical sometimes. Like I overthink things. I can really, really caught in trying to find like the right answer or the perfect answer, as opposed to like being okay with something that is good enough, or being even bottoms up about it and saying like, who knows, but I'm going to do this thing for like a week, and I'm going to do another thing for the next week, and this is how I'm going to roughly figure out what's working and what isn't. So all of these things have trade-offs. But if you really wanted to work on the synthesis piece, I think the starting point is just like developing a healthy skepticism of what you believe is true, and like actively trying to triangulate with other people and then actually incorporate their points of view. Yeah.
And how do you figure out what is healthy and what's not?
I don't know. I've clearly been on one of those sides of the equation for a while. How do you figure what's healthy and what is not? It's probably just like really checking in with yourself in the moment, right? Like, are you putting yourself in a position where you find yourself like really slowing down, or losing your ability to execute on a path that you've chosen because you're so concerned about whether or not it's the right one? Right? If you start to notice that happening, like you're probably leaning too far in one direction.
So that freezing again. If you're freezing yourself,
yeah,
you might be overdoing it.
I think so. Yeah. Or if you are using it as a substitute for like really just introspecting and getting in touch with what you want. And I do that too sometimes. Like one framework I really, really like around this is accepting trade-offs. So you can give me a ton of information. I'll plot out like 10 different paths I can take. And then I will try to pick the best path. And another approach is to say, okay, cool. I've done a lot of digging, and I think these are probably like the pros and cons of each one. And I don't know which one is the best one, but I'm going to just like pick this one, and I know what the cons are going in. So that has been very helpful for me. Instead of trying to find like the right solution, getting okay with the fact that there isn't necessarily one, or if there is one, the amount of time it would take to find it would probably just like completely diminish the process of having found the right solution in the first place. Because good now is better than great never, right?
Yeah.
So that
Ironically, that is the perfect answer. So
yeah,
you can have both.
sure. Is it the perfect answer? Let me analyze that for a bit. Yeah. So I really like that trade-off framework. And that might be a good stopping point where you're like, I know I've done my research. I've synthesized a bunch of information, and I'm not going to perfectly package it right now into the right path forward. I'm instead going to say, here are the pros and cons. I'm gonna hope for these pros and accept these cons if they happen. And that kind of forces you, I think, to like get to a more internal place where you're like, what is my actual value set? Like if I consider the range of possibilities here, like what am I going to be okay with? As opposed to doing this from outside of yourself where you're saying like, this is what it should be. All of these themes come together, huh?
Yeah, this sounds a lot like love, which is seeing the thing as it is. Which could be, there is no perfect answer. If I spend the time to find the perfect answer without any cons, right, I will have waited too long and the opportunity will be lost.
So to take your phrase, you heard it here first. The answer to developing information synthesis is love.
There you go. I think so too. I think, or at least, awareness, right, is another way of putting it, and which is the first step of love, which is to be fully aware and do your best to remove the bias, which is seeing something for as it is, which is the situation at hand, and fleshing out the options as best you can and saying there will be trade-offs, right? Or if I find something that doesn't have trade-offs, it might take too long, which in itself is a trade-off. I have now traded time and potentially lost the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how I approach stuff too, man. So it's good to hear. That's validating for me.
Yeah. We might both be wrong in the same way.
We might, but that's a trade-off. Like for now, though.
Right. Like, would you rather be right apart or wrong together? I'd rather be wrong together. So.
You know what? Yeah, that reminds me of another good quote I heard, which is like, would you rather be right or would you rather be free?
Oh, gosh, I really like that.
Yeah. No, that's the letting go. That's the, hey, we'll be wrong together. You're freeing yourself from that expectation of needing to be perfect. But you're still trying because you would also be mad at yourself if you didn't try. And so that's, again, knowing yourself and loving yourself and how you would feel and not being like, why? I shouldn't have expectations of myself. It's like, no, you do. That's natural.
Yeah.
Love that too, man.
As we're talking about this, like one thought I do have is the process of trying to come up with unifying theories for things. Like that is a good way to work on the synthesis muscle. It's really frustrating and you never get there, but and it can be quite painful. But running with that exercise a couple times, like I don't know if I agree with this, but I certainly have done that my entire life. Is like try to come up with unifying theories of everything that I'm encountering. I've done it in my relationships. I've done it in work. I've done it in school. I've done it in figuring out what genre of music I'm most into. And it might be that process and just running through that a bunch does help with the information synthesis muscle, but it's not the answer to synthesizing information.
Interesting. So if I was to, well, actually, could you explain to our audience who might not be familiar with the concept of a unifying theory, what is that to you?
I think it means taking a bunch of information and forcing it to fit into a framework that is consistent and doesn't have any contradictions to it. That's at least how I think about it in the way, and that's how I think about what I was explaining to you.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
Like, how do you make it all make sense?
Right. And do you find you're successful at that often with these things?
Successful for a time. I've never gotten to a stable theory of anything, but I'll get to something where it feels right for a while, and then new information comes up, and you're like, oh, damn it. I wish I hadn't found that out. I've definitely had that experience a bunch. I'm like, I really thought that I got it this time.
Like a dog chasing its tail.
Yeah. Our chief product officer recently mentioned to me, he said, we will never know less about this than we know today. I really like that.
True. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. In my head, I'm also trying to think of counterexamples, and I'm like, what if you find out your base assumptions are wrong? But then that means all along you didn't.
But that
know.
is also new information.
Exactly. So you gained that, even though you lost what you thought you had, you never had it to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still.
Yeah.
That's a good positive outlook. You're always learning more.
Always learning more.
Yeah.
And it also, the framing, the negative framing of it, I think, like necessitates humility, and I really like that. It's like when I'm trying to get something perfect, like stopping and being like, wait, like there's literally no way. There's no way that an answer I come up with today could ever be as good as an answer I'll come up with a month from now. I just don't have the information.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so if it pushes me a little bit towards the mindset of like, okay, I'm going to stop here and then run with it for a bit and see what happens.
That's a good one too,
mm-hmm.
for everybody. So what you come up with now will never be as good as what you come up with later.
Right.
But don't let that stop you from coming up with something now.
Right.
That's the first step to the better later thing.
Yes, it is. I like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. We are going very deep in many of these questions. So
you can totally throttle me and just be like, all right, give me 5 words on this one, and we can do that. That's a game. No. Alrighty.
I'm loving this. I'm going with the flow here, man. That's
cool.
The point of this is to follow what feels right. You know, I heard there's an interesting concept in one of these books. It was called they call them golden threads. And a golden thread is something that you encounter in life that you keep pulling, it keeps giving you more gold, and you're like, oh, what's over here, right? Like there's something that's that intuitive hit to tug more on that,
yeah,
or to follow it, right? It's like, my dad invents stuff, right? So,
okay.
And he's like, when you're inventing stuff, this happens all the time. He's like, it's like you're in a mine and you strike ore, and then the wall collapses, and it just leads to more and more veins of whatever you're mining for. Right, like one idea leads to another idea and another idea and another idea, and that's what I'm feeling here. And like I think we came out of that with a bunch of gold.
We did. There's some gold there for sure.
So no regrets.
Okay.
No Betty. So I want to talk about. So we talked about strengths and basically how you develop them, and we didn't really get into how you discover them. That's the next question. Just how do you discover a strength? How do you realize this is the thing I'm good at? Maybe I should do more of it.
I've always discovered it through. I was gonna say I've always discovered it through other people. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've definitely, because I have so much self-doubt about a lot of these things, because I don't give myself permission to believe that I am a certain way often, especially when that certain way is a good thing or something I perceive as good. It can be difficult for me to truly see those things in myself without someone else pointing them out.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this stuff has been pointed out to me by other people. I think it's some combination of that plus ego. The ego is like a hidden belief that you don't want to admit, where you're like, I'm pretty good at this thing. But embedded in the ego is fear that you're not. And so I think the combination of like developing those beliefs behind the scenes, having someone else say, hey man, like you're really good at that. And then letting go of some of that fear. Like that's the process, I think, for me. That's what it has been.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a different relationship to ego than I would have thought. Or at least, for me, the ego is in like I'm good at this thing, yeah, I'm good at this thing. Yeah. Or like that's what, when I think of egotistical people, that's what I think of.
Mm-hmm.
So you seem to have tempered that quite a bit.
Maybe. I mean, even when I'm expressing it intensely, and I can, especially when I was a little younger, I can think of, coming across as extremely arrogant on some of this stuff. Like especially like my ability to win an argument is something that when I was in my late teens and earlier 20s, like that was something I was like proud of. It's like there is no idea that I cannot wrap my head. So it's like I've had times of arrogance, but like embedded in that is generally a fear that you're wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's what makes you fight so hard sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Cool. So seek feedback, other people, or
be open to it. I mean, be open to letting other people be mirrors to you. Yeah.
Okay. Now, on the flip side, how did you learn about any shortcomings or flaws, and how do you address them?
100 times a day, every day.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think here again, like, seek feedback. It's core to the way that I work. Like, we've tried to build a extremely transparent culture where, like, every single person has like a shared responsibility for each other's growth and their own growth. So extreme transparency, compassionate transparency, like self-discovery, exploration, like that's all super important. I've joked sometimes that building a startup is kind of like VC subsidized self-actualization, where where you basically, like, you put yourself in an environment where you are going to realize, like, every tiny thing about yourself that is suboptimal, because everything stops with you. So you're going to come across, like, the smallest and largest things. And then in that context, because everything stops with you, like, tons of those things are existential.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in other environments, like, people can work around them. So, I mean, maybe there's something in there, which is like, put yourself in an environment where, like, everything rests on your shoulders truly. And then the smallest management ticks to communication style to, like, deep ego stuff and the way that you work, like, it'll all come out. I think the one caveat there is that if you know, the proverbial Silicon Valley startup is one that kind of succeeds in spite of itself. It's like you're solving a problem that is so acute and so painful that you only have to get one thing right and you're okay. And I can think of that happening for some people, but very rarely. Like, most of the time, it's a slog, and you have to get a lot of things right. You have to keep a lot of things going. So, you know, putting yourself in an environment where you're going to come up across your shortcomings constantly, and then creating agreements with the people around you that, like, you'll help each other with those. That's probably the core of it. Yeah.
And what's the process look like for you after, like, you make this agreement, you hear from them, hey, this thing needs adjusting?
Yeah. So part one of the process is, like, then agreeing that it's actually a problem. And, you know, if you were to chat to folks I work with, like, you'll and say, like, hey, what are the things that Joe struggles with? Like, they'll tell you, partly because they observe them, but partly because, like, I headline them. Like, I'll go into a meeting and be like, all right, everyone, here's how I'm feeling today. Like, here are some of the things that I know are challenging for me. I'm asking you to please point them out if they happen. Right? Like, there's this idea of a user manual that I really like, where you actually write out effectively a guide to working with you, where it has like the warnings and the alerts and, like, the gotchas and everything.
Yeah.
So that there's no guessing. And a big part of that is, like, here are the 15 different ways that I malfunction. Or here are, like, the usability hacks that, like, you really shouldn't have to deal with yourself. But, you know, if you really want to work effectively with me, like, you should just know this is true. Like, I take a very long time to trust people. I have a tendency towards micromanagement. Like, I know that about myself. And part of resolving that is working out trust and figuring out how to create, like, you know, goal-driven discussions. But part of it is also, like, hey, if you want to cut through a lot of that stuff, like, over-communicate with me for the first month that we work together, and then I'll leave you alone. Because, like, if I understand how you think and I have trust in the way that you think, like, it's going to be much easier for me to let go. So I think, you know, step one is being open to it and putting yourself in an environment where it gets surfaced. Step two is, like, agreeing with everyone that it's there and being okay with it being there. And then step three is some combination of, like, strategies for working around it plus strategies for, like, working through it.
That is super useful, and I love the concept.
Cool.
Of a user manual.
I can't lay claim to it. I got it from a guy named Jay Desai, who's the founder of a company called Patient Ping.
Patient Ping.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, that sounds like amazing advice. It sounds super functional. I'm interested to give that a shot in some dimension.
Do it.
Very cool. So yeah, just to recap, everybody. Actually, no, I'm not going to recap that one because I want to move on. But if you need to, rewind, because that was some good stuff.
Okay.
So that's, shortcomings and flaws, discovering them and addressing them. I want to ask something a little tougher. So is there something you're struggling with right now, and how are you grappling with it?
Yeah. There are tons of things I'm struggling with right now. I'm trying to pick one. I think a relatively easy one to pick is like the experience of being micromanaged with some of the people that I work with, and where that is hardest, where it's hardest, is where the good outcome for the work is not clear. So it's hard for me to sit down at the beginning and say like, hey, this is what good looks like, and I'm here as a resource. Like, go take a stab at it. There's a lot of work, I think, in early stage environments or creative environments where like the work is simultaneously like exploratory and directed. Like the work itself is the process of figuring out what good looks like. And when you are collaborating with another person on that, it can be really, really hard to do it in a way that doesn't feel disempowering for them. So that's something I'm actively working on. I mean, I think the most important strategies there have been, one, acknowledging that it's something I struggle with. Two, checking in with the people I'm working with and saying like, how do you feel? Are you frustrated right now? Like, do you feel like you have enough space? What feedback do you have for me? Like, how can I make this easier for both of us? Three is trying to make those conversations as goal-oriented as possible, even if the goal is like, we just want to try to see what we can learn from this. And then like, here are the kind of learnings that would be interesting. So I think a goal orientation, tons of transparency, lots of check-ins is a good way to manage that. But that's something that I continue to struggle with. And I think one of the things that really the only thing that keeps me up at night is how I am making other people feel in the office. Like I that is what I lose sleep over. I'll have stress dreams about enterprise contracts and all sorts, but the thing I lose sleep over is whether or not I am creating an environment for people to feel fulfilled and to reach their potential. And so, this particular challenge is one that's like very important to me.
Yeah. Hearing you say all that and deal with that, and the way in which you're dealing with it, to me is incredibly impressive.
Thank you.
So I just want to put that out there. Like, that sounds like so incredibly aware of the dynamics between you and other people, the fact that you still need to get shit done, right? Like, that's a crazy position to be in, and to balance, and it sounds like you're approaching it in a way that honestly I haven't heard before or articulated. And I'm like, wow, I'm taking mental notes.
Okay.
For sure. And I think much of the audience will too, like, especially like if they ever find themselves in that situation, or even if I would talk to my manager and be like, wait, this is a really good framework for the way we can interact together. So yeah, I just want to say I'm super impressed. I think for whatever weight my opinion has, that you're doing amazingly.
Thank you.
The fact that you're even there and willing to do that, it seems to me miles beyond most of the people in upper level positions that I've dealt with, in the past, really, and seen in my life and met in my life. So, dude, rock on.
Definitely trying.
Yeah, it shows. So I want to tie that into, first of all, I just want to say also you're super brave for putting yourself out there like that. Like, again, like this, I know this is a common theme. Like, you're fucking brave for being able to go out and say like, this is me. These are all my things. This is how to deal with me. You're open to getting the feedback that may or may not be something that you're comfortable with, and that also is extremely brave. It's not easy to get feedback that is at the character level, right?
Yeah, it's hard stuff.
Yeah, and then to have everything on your shoulders too. And so I just want to say that, incredibly brave for doing
Appreciate
that.
it.
And I want to zoom in on that concept of bravery for a minute. And I want you to tell me a time that you were very brave recently.
I'm going to give you the same answer I gave you earlier, which is I don't really perceive myself as being that brave most of the time because it's always looking at what the alternative would be.
Okay, well, if you have to put the hat on for a second.
Okay. I mean, but just like for saying, like, think about the alternative to that. Like, to know that you are making it harder for people to do their work and to not do something about that. Like, that you'd have to be really brave to do that. Like, to know that you are like actively harming yourself and others and like your ability to make an impact.
Bravery? I guess
maybe it's stupidity. I don't know, but like I guess it comes back to the theme I shared earlier, which is like I don't feel like I have an option. Like I have to make the jump.
You're morally obligated.
Yeah. It's like a values driven thing.
Okay.
And if that's true, then like who cares about bravery? I guess. That's sort of how I framed it. I mean, if I were to really. If I step out of myself and I look at my life, I can point to things that are brave. I'm like, oh, I started I'm not even an immigrant. I'm a non-immigrant alien in this country, technically. Like looking at the healthcare system of a different country, saying this is broken, and I've experienced some of the ways in which it might be fixed. And I am going to put my immigration status at risk and not earn much of a salary. And just take that leap. Like, I guess that's brave or risky somehow, but it didn't feel that way at the time. And for the bravery story, there's always like the leverage story as well, which is like, well, that sounds like a great opportunity. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry for the non-answer on this one.
No, that's fair. That's how you feel about it. I would say even coming on this podcast is brave, right? And opening up in the way you have.
Yeah.
And not necessarily brave in the, I'm going to go rescue someone from a pit of fire, like that type of thing, but in a more subtle internal way. So I just want to highlight that too. And since you learn your strengths through other people, I'm telling you here now.
I'll take it.
Awesome. I want to move on to so that was the self-knowledge and self-building section. We're nearing the home stretch. So we're going to talk about meaning and fulfillment.
Okay.
So, as we talk about your journey, I want to ask, do you have a destination in mind? And are we there yet?
We're not there yet.
Okay, that was a quick answer.
Do we have a destination in mind? No. We don't have a destination in mind, and we're not there yet.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
What are you aiming at then?
So one thread has got to be like who I am in myself, right? I think the experience of being alive, and there's this incredible arc there around learning to be okay with myself, being accepting, and really embracing the journey. Like that's part of the destination. Like the journey is the destination, right? I think that impact on the world around me is a big part of the destination as well. And it's like, this may change in the future, the way I think about this, but at least for the moment, like what feels most important to me is actively reducing suffering. I probably spend 6 to 8 hours a day on Spotify. I love music. It colors everything I do. It gives me a ton of fulfillment, right? I love the recommendations. I love the discovery experience. Like, it's an amazing product. And I could probably have a lot of fun working on something like that. At the same time, if Spotify didn't exist, like, I would be really, really happy with like crappy headphones and a CD Walkman. And I know that because I was really happy with that as as like, as an 11-year-old. Like that was the best. And there are a lot of things like that out there where, could I visualize myself loving the experience of working on those projects? Like, absolutely I can. But when I try to get in touch with what calls to me, it's the flip side, which is like, there are people out there who are actively suffering in ways that they do not need to be suffering. That is completely unnecessary. Like that, there's got to be a thread there around changing that. So I think I struggle with this a lot because it feels self-righteous to say that. At least I feel self-righteous saying it a little bit. Like, there's the trope of you work at Facebook. It's like there's the trope of connecting the world, and like there's this big mission, and like we're making the world better, and there's this trope of like the sort of self-righteous, starving entrepreneur, artist person working on like education who's like, you're not mission driven, like I'm mission driven or something. And I'm very nervous of that.
Well, you don't come off that way to me at all.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. So, at least for where I am right now, it feels very important to actively reverse suffering, and not just enable thriving. Part of what's like beautifully ironic about that in this moment is that the two threads I described to you, the first one in my life, that is not a thread about suffering. That is a thread about thriving. Like I am exploring things and modalities and people and ideas that I'm looking to thrive in what I do, right? But in my work, I'm looking to reduce suffering. And maybe here's the unifying theory: like, how lucky am I to be in a place where like the suffering aspect has been taken care of, and I can actually focus on like true fulfillment, or I can focus on thriving. That I have the space to even think about it. So in some sense, I guess the purpose for me is like, how can I lift enough people up so that the work that everyone else is doing on like fulfillment and meaning and thriving can be made available to those people too.
That, when you say that, I feel like I'm sitting in front of somebody with very noble desires, and I have a pretty good bullshit detector.
Okay.
And I'm telling you, you're not that self-righteous, typical Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and I wouldn't have had you on if you were. Because fuck those people. So thank you for expressing that. And that's part of that resonates with me hard, because that's part of the purpose of this, is to give people who feel it's a different thing, right? This is, I think, your physical suffering, medical suffering, which is crazy important, but this for me is like trying to help people who feel lost on like a existential, career, professional level, and giving them the picture into many different options and seeing which one resonates best with them, right?
Yeah.
I feel you on that, man. And yeah, we are extremely lucky to be in this position, and I feel like being in this position comes with some responsibility to use it to help lift other people up as best you can. You say like, look, dude, I walked down this path. You don't want to walk down this one. It's like, it's what you do with kids, right? It's what parents do with you. You say, that's a dead end. Don't walk down that path. They might do it anyway, but at least you told them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a simple.
You gotta let them figure it out for themselves too.
Yeah. Sometimes, but at least tell them too, because it's like,
yeah.
Right.
It's like, that's a bad idea. You're gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
You're gonna remember that I said it was a bad idea.
And you get a big told you so.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's like, so this interesting simultaneous, like, yes, lucky, and all the other things you mentioned, like the story of being hardworking, right? And I think to properly be in that position, right? Again, it's the same relationship a parent might have to a child, or just someone who has more experience in one domain than another, or just someone who's been down the path, and just say like, this is what it's like. Here's the things to watch out for. That's a pitfall. Don't do that, right? And maybe go over here, maybe go over there, right? Do your thing, but here's some help. Here's a tool, right? That's what it's about. It's like, here's some tools to fix or assist with your problem. And yes, lucky, and I'm so appreciative of it. And I see a lot of I'm also sensing a bit of like resistance to appreciation in you in general, with like the, you know, not seeing the positive sides. And one thing that I you know, I want to add to your chart of emotion here, because I saw another one really similar to that, where it, you know, kind of, it's another scale, and on the bottom of it is shame, and at the top of it is gratitude.
Yeah.
And so I want to add to the yes, I want to yes and this also, right? With the yes, Lucky, yes, lift other people up as best you can. Yes, do everything you can to help.
And yes, be actually grateful for the parts of you that may well be great.
Yes. That's it. So I want to offer that as a thing.
I like that. There's an honesty in that. There's an honesty and a hopefulness in that. That's quite beautiful.
I'm glad you can see that. Yeah. Part of me wants to be like, no, do it. Be grateful now. The other part of me is like, it'll, you know, same as before, right? It'll come when it comes.
Yeah.
But just want to offer that as a potential path forward. You know, and another perspective to add to the wheel, right? So I also want to ask, because again, this is about guiding people who feel lost. Do you ever feel like you're not on the path?
All the time. Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
And like, how do you course correct, or what's that feel like?
I think I just have to take myself out of it sometimes. To really find myself again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's as simple as that.
What's that look like?
Music, nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you just
changing my environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sleep on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you wake up, and I think if you do that enough times and you're still feeling lost, you might actually be lost. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you need a course correct, but more often than not, it's temporary, for me at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if I'm really kind to myself, it's often tied up in a bunch of other stuff that I don't have that much control over. Like my emotional energy is really tied up in how much pain I'm experiencing. So sometimes if I'm feeling lost, it's actually just like, I'm having a really bad day. Like I'm sick.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hurting. I'm physically hurting.
Mm.
And
you mean in relation to the condition you mentioned?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, sometimes it's as simple as accepting that experience, not forcing it, and saying, you know, I'm going to be okay with going home at 3 p.m. and putting away my computer and listening to some music and making some tea and just being.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to figure it out right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how I feel in the morning. Yeah.
Sweet. I think, yeah, that's a really important balance to the drive, right? And satiating that. Yeah, finding the time for, you know, what they call it, self-care. Right?
Yes. and sometimes feeling lost is not actually feeling lost, it's feeling hopeless. Feeling lost is, to me, like, am I going in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
Feeling hopeless is like, I think I'm going in the right direction, but I don't know if I can do it. And that's a distinction that most of the times I think I would have in the past said, like, oh, I'm feeling lost. What I'm actually feeling is pressure. Like, I know I'm going in the right direction. Like, this is the right thing to be doing. And like, can I do it? And I'm lucky in that for me, my framing, and I think I remind myself that this is evidence of like deep self-love. My framing tends to not be like, I can't do it, and is more like, I could be doing more to get there. And that's a relatively more constructive view of that situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Because embedded in that is like a fundamental belief that you can actually do it, as opposed to a fundamental belief that it's impossible.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. And that touches on everything we talked about earlier, which is the doing better versus doing.
Yeah.
Right? Good enough, perfect, and so on. So on the flip side, when do you feel most found? When do you feel like you're on the path, you're doing this thing? Do you?
Yeah, moments of flow in little ways. Just like getting lost in my work. I mean, I think it's at the end of a day where you were willing to take those little steps and you look back and you're like, whoa, that was a giant leap. And it didn't feel like it was going to be a giant leap when you started the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are moments of like, I can do this. Like vulnerability and love with a partner, definitely moments of feeling found as well. And music sometimes for me.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
These are that the vulnerability one is something I want to double click on. Because for me too,
yeah,
you know, or even if not with a partner, just in general. And I also want to tie this before it. I think that's what's happening right now too. Like, I think you're being very vulnerable, which to me is very brave. And, you know, in the world of, you know, highlight reels on social media and fake personalities on the news that are anything but vulnerable, you know, this to me is like a breath of fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. And I just want to highlight the sense of freedom it can provide in letting out all of you to somebody, whether it may be a friend, it might be a partner, whatever, right? And just stress that, because, yeah, I just want to stress, I don't want to get into the whole societally why we're so closed off, but just check yourself, and, you know, hopefully you're fortunate enough to find someone that you can confide in. And also what I tend to find is that it'll help build a closer bond with that person too. And it's just a win-win as far as I'm concerned, if you find the right person to be able to open up to. So just want to recommend that as some actionable advice for the audience. Let's talk about intention. So I ran across an interesting framework, which is, you can think of it maybe as like a spectrum of service to self or service to others. And I want to ask you how you balance that and which is more fulfilling.
Service to others is generally more fulfilling, but I serve others better when I serve myself. I've had to learn that. I'm still learning that.
Okay.
Yeah. I can only give all that I can give if I look after myself enough.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
No.
Gotcha. So maybe in that sense they're almost tied together.
I think they're tied together, and I also think that you can easily delude yourself into thinking that they are the same thing, and they're not.
Right? What makes you say that?
Everything in moderation, right? Like if you lean too hard on either one of those, I think you could put yourself in a position where you think that you're doing both, but you're really just doing one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this ties into the balance bit then.
Sure.
How do you balance it?
Not super well at the moment, but increasingly well over time. Self-care, moments of self-care, taking pauses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to move to a different question. So what motivates you and gets you out of bed every morning? On those mornings when the CEO voice doesn't work, do you still get up?
I do. Sometimes a little later than I would like to, but yeah, I do get up. What motivates me to do that? Commitment to my team is the primary thing. Commitment to my team for sure. And if I am mindful enough, a reminder of why I am doing what I'm doing in the first place. The fact that it's for something that is greater than myself, that's certainly helpful. Having that knowledge of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like, you know, we talked a bit about values before. It sounds like one of your core values to me is integrity. That's following through on commitments.
It is, I would put that in the list for sure. Integrity is right up there. Probably the primary value.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it's cool to feel seen on that.
My pleasure, man. I mean, for me too, it's like, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, then like, what is the point of saying anything? Like, no one can trust you. Like, that's, to me, like the foundational building block of society is that I can take you at your word. And now suddenly all of the worries I might have had about what are you going to do has now collapsed, and I can focus on another thing.
Yeah. And the way I get in touch with seeing that as a value is less that like I live it out all the time, and more than in moments where I'm not living it out, like how does it feel? And that to me is a better representation of like what the core values are than like, some other version of it.
So this is a good framework for people too, is check in with how you feel when you're not being
a certain way.
Yeah.
And are you okay with that? And sometimes it's fine. Like we don't all have to have the same value set.
No.
Yeah.
Although I think I can make a decent case that integrity is one that we all probably should have.
Yeah.
Because that, I heard a really interesting thing the other day from one of my favorite speakers, and like, he was like, listen, eBay never should have worked. What should have happened with eBay is I sent you a box of junk and your check to me bounced, right? But the reason eBay worked is because people acted with integrity. Like, they sent the thing and the money went through. And all of the middlemen who were like, hey, we're going to guarantee this deal, they were like completely run out of business. They were unnecessary. You didn't need to have an escrow because people were acting with integrity. They said, I will do this thing that I said I would do. I'm going to send you the thing that's going to work. And then I'm going to send you the money and you're going to get it, right? Minus a few people nowadays who are like sending like fake Xboxes or whatever. But generally speaking, eBay never should have worked. And it did, because we act with integrity. And that comes with that is telling the truth, right? Here's what I'm going to do. And then you do it. You follow through, right? So I think that to me is one that seems to work amazingly well in scale, and is the only thing that makes society scale, or one of the many things that make society scale is I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do, right? I agree that I don't think every value can be applied to everyone. I think everyone's going to have their own and how they prioritize it, but that to me seems like a really strong one, and I think what makes shit work. I think it's what makes you work so well with everything and being able to be a CEO is that you have integrity, but that also implies to even being an employee. Mm-hmm. If you don't do your shit, you're out, right? So
eventually,
right. So I would say it's a long-term strategy towards success is acting with integrity, and that's something I think everyone can do as long as you don't, write checks your ass can't cash, right? I could go on a whole one about that, and actually this does kind of tie into. Well, I was going to ask one next question. This kind of ties into that, like the integrity and telling the truth seems like a core fundamental belief that works for everybody, which I think is what a lot of religions try to get at too, with things like treat others like you'd like to be treated, and initially the 10 Commandments was, like don't murder people, right? That's a pretty good one that we should probably all value, right? Don't covet your neighbor's wife, right? That's also probably a good one, right? That ruins lives. And so I kind of want to get, maybe not don't eat shellfish. That seems kind of silly, but that wasn't a commandment. But, so I kind of want to get into like, are you religious or spiritual? And if not, like, how do you find your value structure?
I'm certainly not religious, and I'm nervous to say that I'm spiritual. I'm exploring. Mm-hmm. Where do I find my value structure? I don't know. My parents, probably. It came from somewhere. Like, I don't think it's innate. Mm-hmm. But to actually trace that back is hard. I really don't have a good answer to that at all.
Okay. Would you explore it all the time, or like, does it take specific moments for you to?
I think I started deeply exploring it when I was shifting into college and had the space to kind of be my own person. I spent a summer working at Bridgewater, the hedge fund in Connecticut that is super into like radical transparency. And I mean, it's a very interesting place. It's a super interesting place. But one of the core ideas is like seek truth and, you know, be a principled thinker. Like you should be able to reduce the way that you see the world down to these like core axioms. And, you know, outside of the actual working environment, being exposed to those ideas kind of gave me the space to start thinking about my own life that way. So that was I think a big part of the initial exploration. And another thread would have been on the debating side, where I realized pretty quickly how subjective truth was. I could be given any topic and win, regardless of whether or not I agreed with it or believed in it. And that I think the combination of like being exposed to very principled thinkers, realizing how powerful rhetoric is, and how decoupled it is from reality, plus my parents. Those are the ingredients that I think result in my being someone who thinks a lot about values. But where the actual values come from, I don't know.
And how would we, keeping this in the theme of like stuff for the audience, right? How would someone go about figuring out what their values are? And why might they want to do that?
Figuring them out, I think it's an iterative process. I think it's like, what am I afraid my values might be? What do I really wish they were? Like, what I think they actually are. Like, just having an honest conversation with yourself about that and write them down and see how it feels. Sit with them for a while and evolve them over time. It's kind of what I've been doing. And it's hard to say it's working or not working because there isn't really an end point. I think it's an ongoing thing. What is the what's the benefit of doing it? I mean, I think it gives you a pretty good framework for making decisions in life. Like when you have hard stuff that you have to deal with, like being able to come back to core beliefs you have about yourself and the way things ought to be. I know we've spoken a bunch about the trade-offs of like, you know, whether or not things should be a certain way. But like if you have a value set, I think it makes decision making easier and more consistent. So that's one major benefit. And I think the other thing is it cuts through a lot of bullshit in relationships. Like think about how much work goes into understanding your values. If you can like meet someone and genuinely be on the same page, you just did like half the work. You know, I'm getting yourself into like what could become a really beautiful relationship.
I like that a lot. So I like what you said about values acting as a framework for decision making, right? And so when I think of values or like principles, right, that's the thing that comes first, right? A principle, it's the first one, right? And that's what you filter your decisions through. So say you're faced with a lot of options, right? You can start filtering them through like, okay, would I be acting with an integrity to do this? You know, that's one value set. Or to use the other extreme, and unlike the example, like, would it involve killing somebody? Okay, can't do that one, you know? Right? So it lets you filter stuff out and say, like, from the nearly infinite amount of choices I might have in front of me, I can actually come up with maybe a small handful.
Yeah.
Right? Or even just one. And then, boom, easy. I no longer have to be overwhelmed. Right?
And at the end there, you're probably going to have trade-offs between values.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when things can get tricky.
Yeah.
For sure. Or sometimes not, you know, but it's a way to approach huge amounts of decisions, potentiality, right, itself. You know, you can kind of cut that down into something manageable at least. Cool. So we're near the end. I want to talk about something that's pretty, I think that you'll be able to have a good perspective on. And would be really useful for the audience to know. So I want to know, how do you partition your time? How do you balance work and life?
I carve out slots of time far in advance where I'm not going to be working. I'll carve out a long weekend. I'll buy concert tickets long in advance. I will book travel long in advance. And then generally assume that the rest of my time will be filled with work. So there's a rough schedule to each day where I know generally when I want to go to bed, when I want to wake up, what kind of things I want to do before I go to work. And beyond that, I don't really try actively to find balance on a day-to-day so much as I try to create balance like week to week and having space that I know unequivocally is just space.
Okay. This is good advice. Do stuff in advance.
Plan to be spontaneous.
Yeah. My friend had a good one. It's like semi-structured fun.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you go to an event, you're like, okay, 2 p.m. I'll be over here. I'll be hiking. You're like, 7 is dinner, and then between it's whatever.
Yeah.
Right. But a little bit kind of like this podcast. It's semi-structured. We got a list of questions, but there's time to
meander.
Yeah. Take the scenic route. Okay. Another one that is a bit of a more challenging one. I want to ask, how do you challenge your beliefs and develop new perspectives?
Talking about them with people where there's a shared understanding that that's what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's a definitely. Yeah, I think there's a theme here for me, which is like, expose yourself to environments where you're going to be put on the spot and your beliefs will be challenged, and do that with people who are willing and able to challenge them. So really the same as the answer I gave you around like feedback and identifying weaknesses.
Awesome.
Yeah. I don't know that I actively seek out people with contrarian views relative to mine. And I think there are some people who do that so much as creating a sense of curiosity and openness with the people that I already know well. And that probably means that the space of ideas is limited. Like I'm unlikely to sit down with with someone who holds like different values to mine. But assuming the value sets are similar, like that's a space in which the exploration of beliefs I think can happen productively.
Got it. So not with like a sociopathic liar.
Right. Yeah, I forget where I heard this, but you can't play chess with a pigeon, like it shits on the board.
There's a running theme of shit here.
Right.
Yeah, true that. Okay, cool. So just going to reiterate this for the audience. It's, actively seek situations where you can be put on the spot and with people who have the right value makeup to sit in a room with you and do it in a constructive manner. Right? And I also want to highlight, I think the benefit of doing that is you will build something new, right? You'll become better in whatever dimension that you're discussing. And you can also, and I think once you do that, at least I found with me, you also then develop your relationship with them better. And so it's another one of those, like, if you put your feet into the fire a little bit, like you might get temporarily burned, but it'll come out way stronger.
Yeah.
It's
I like that.
It's like working out, but mentally and character-wise, right?
It is a process of building relationships, yeah.
Sweet. So there's 2 final questions.
Okay.
We're nearing the end. So what advice would you like to offer our younger audience, or even your younger self, who are just beginning their paths of self-discovery or careers?
Know that your self-critical inner voice is the surest evidence of self-love. Take what is useful, leave the rest, and take the first step.
Okay. That was beautifully concise and easier said than done, but very concise, easy to remember. Amazing. And finally, are there any causes or projects that you want to bring to our audience's attention?
Oh, that's a good question. One of the really interesting conversations that is taking place in healthcare at the moment is around what people are calling social determinants of health, or social factors. And it's the idea that really a small percentage of your actual health is medical. And it's hard to measure exactly, but call it 30%. And everything else is environmental. It's the values of the people you grow up around. It's whether or not you have access to public transportation, clean water, education, housing, right? So you think about a low-income single mom who has 3 kids and is working 2 shift jobs and has a severe chronic condition that requires relatively expensive medication, where granted, like, that medication is covered by Medicaid or by their insurance plan, right? So for $50 a month, this mom can get her medication and stay generally healthy, in addition to all sorts of lifestyle modification, right? And what's happening is every 6 weeks, she shows up at the emergency department, and she's sick, she's critical, she has to be admitted to the hospital. She stays there for a couple of days. They get her back to recovery. They give her some more of the medication to take home with her because there's a pharmacy in the hospital. And every time that happens, she's away from her children, she's away from her job, she's losing income, and the taxpayer is spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on her using those resources, like the emergency department. Okay, so like what's going on here, right? Like it could be that she lacks discipline, or doesn't understand the importance of the medication. Or it could be that the nearest pharmacy to her home is a 30-minute drive away. She doesn't have a car, so she actually has to take public transport, which means it's an hour and a half. And she works a shift job where if she doesn't do all of her hours in the day, she doesn't have enough money to buy food for her kids. So it's not that she's irresponsible. It's that she is being forced to choose every single day whether or not to take her medication or feed her children. Okay. That conversation around a real social safety net and the acknowledgement that there are these profound structural barriers that prevent people from changing the trajectory of their health, like, that's a really important conversation. And being aware of that, talking to your relatives about it, and getting involved in any causes you can find that are actively working to better integrate not just mental health and physical health, but the safety net itself and the social fabric. That's an area where there's so much impact to be made.
And how can people learn more or get involved with this?
I would start by Googling social determinants of health and just going down a bit of a rabbit hole online and seeing where it takes you.
Okay. And how widespread is this?
This is one of the most important conversations. Well, what aspect of it? The conversation or the issue?
The issue.
The issue affects every single low-income American.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like, do you know like what % of the population that represents right now?
Ooh, I mean, we're talking about like 30-40% of the country at least.
Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. So, didn't go to the doctor because you didn't have a car, right? Like, you got more sick because you didn't have heat at home. Like, your diabetes is uncontrolled because you can only afford fast food. Right? Like, it's everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Well, shit.
Yeah.
And
big opportunity for change.
Yeah. And how is the campaign against that, I should say? Or
it's coming along. It's a little buzzwordy at the moment. A lot of organizations are talking about it, and there isn't enough evidence-based work being done yet, but it will come.
Okay.
It'll come for sure.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. And then, do you want to plug your company?
No, I don't think so. I'll plug that for anyone listening. If you would like to get involved in making a difference in healthcare, I love to talk about the space. So anyone who wants to brainstorm with me, chat about it, identify what the areas of change are, like if I can help funnel your energy into healthcare, like I'd love to do it. Maybe that'll be at my company, maybe it won't be, but we need more people fighting the fight.
And how can they reach you to do this?
Best way to reach me would be at my personal email address, which would be joe@joekahn.io. I really hate that that's the email address. So that's joe@joekahn.io.